what is the relationship between sleep and learning, which is, I think, one of the most, certainly for me, one of the most important things.
Yeah, you actually have to have sleep in order to consolidate the things that you've learned during the day and integrate the items into your schema of the world. And you also need sleep in order to refine what you know, reducing the power of things that you now know are not true in light of the new information, and to refresh your synaptic circuitry in your brain so that you can fit new things in the next day.
Okay, so sleep is implicated both in memory retention and erasing memory.
Yes.
Talk to me about what is the importance of forgetting. So I forget a lot, a lot. I'm very distressed by how much I forget, but my wife will often say, I wish I had your brain because I don't get hung up on things.
Yeah.
So even though it is, like, I'm not kidding, it's somewhat traumatic for me, the amount of information that I encounter versus what I retain, but I don't get stuck emotionally.
Yeah, and I think you actually probably retain more than you think. You may not be able
Not
to,
how it feels, I'll tell you that.
You may not be able to call it to mind the specific names of things, but I believe you've probably integrated these things into your schema and how you view the world.
What is the schema exactly?
So it's a kind of a loose term to say how you view the world, how things fit into the story that you build in your brain of what the world is about. And so, for example, there's a schema we have of Christmas and what it involves. There's all kinds of pieces of information in that schema, or a schema of what a university is, or a schema of what a center of town looks like. And so we have things that may or may not be in any particular town, but we have an idea of what a town center should look like, So,
are you familiar at all with the idea of chunking?
Yeah. It's kind of like chunking.
Okay,
Yeah.
for people that don't know, explain what chunking is.
Oh boy, I think you could probably explain it better than me, but it's a way to simplify the world by sticking related things together in a chunk.
It's pretty good.
Okay.
Bang on the money. I think the idea comes from chess. So where a chess master will look at a board and he's not seeing the individual pieces, they just see that setup of where you are versus where I am means that we're at this point in the game roughly, and that these moves have been played and these moves are yet to be played, which is how they're able to play so many games at one time. I have a feeling, though, I'm certainly not an expert in this, that this is part of the problem that AI will face as we try to get to general intelligence. Right. The thing that we call common sense, I have a feeling is largely tied to not only the things you can infer, but how much you can reduce something to a set of, like Christmas. It's not exactly Christmas, snow, the glow of Christmas lights, maybe a dude in a red coat, cookies, and it could be a lot of different things, but yet there's some overarching organizational principle that we put things in. Yeah, so right. Hearing you tie that to sleep, that we're constantly updating that schema.
Yeah.
Why is that so important?
Well, I mean, what we learn throughout our lives changes us, and it should, because we are constantly evolving our knowledge as new things get known. We change where we live, and we need to update our schema with the new place that's home instead of the old place. If we go to the old place and knock on that door or try and walk in, it would be bad, right? So we need to constantly update our schema with new information. And in fact, that does get harder as we get older, because
just to update the schema.
Just to update the schema. And possibly one of the reasons why that gets harder is because our sleep starts to degrade a little bit. Now, it's variable whose sleep gets worse at what age, but we do know that we wake up more often. We have fewer big, deep, slow waves of slow wave sleep. And we are more prone to get sleep apnea, which really makes us wake up a lot. And so our sleep, the quality can get bad, and then the updating of our schema doesn't work as well. And that means that we can't learn new things as the world changes around us as easily. So I would.
Do you know, is it the breakdown of sleep that causes the breakdown of brain plasticity? Or is it just that the brain moves through phases and when you're younger, you're super plastic, and as you get older, it just gets more and more rigid?
That's a good question, and I don't think we know the answer to that yet. We do know a lot of things change with age and aging, but we don't know if they are linked to sleep. The two go hand in hand so much. But we do know that those who have the worst cognition when they're older also have the worst sleep. So again, it's
if you
maybe
had
correlational.
to guess, which is causing which?
Maybe a ratchet-like progression, but
It's a positive feedback loop.
a positive feedback loop. So, but if you can arrest sleep degradation, you could probably arrest dementia as well.
Okay, that's very interesting. All right, so then as we tease that apart, walk us through what are the phases of sleep,
Right.
And what are we doing in our lives that begin to disrupt those phases?
Right. So the first phase we go into when we're dozing is called stage 1, and that's a lot of alpha in our brain, which is 8 to 11 hertz activity. And
Is it a quieting down or a
it's a-
revving up of the mind?
I guess it would be considered perhaps a quieting down. There's actually no change in neural activity, but it's a change in pattern of activity.
So let me ask, sorry, and we will go through all of these stages, but I find this very interesting. So the brain doesn't end up conserving energy while we sleep, which would have
Not
been
much.
my sort of childhood thought
Yeah.
is, oh, my brain is going offline.
Right.
But is it, I'm assuming, the difference between conscious activity and subconscious activity? Or even during the day, is my brain activity primarily subconscious?
That's a difficult one. We don't really have a good physiological definition for what subconscious is.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think our subconscious is working all day long in terms of what we define as the subconsciousness, just thoughts and feelings and gut feelings and emotions that occur beneath our perception of how we feel or what we're thinking.
If I showed you a brain scan of somebody spaced out,
Yeah.
they're totally in the default mode network.
Yeah.
They're driving to work, but they're not really aware because they've done it so many times. And I showed you a brain scan of somebody in phase 1, maybe is the closest. Would you be able to tell the difference? Like, is it obvious this person is daydreaming versus this person is sleeping?
Yeah. Yeah. They're
Okay.
different. Yeah. And even daydreaming, I mean, it depends on what you're daydreaming about, right? What your brain is going to be doing, which parts of your brain are going to be activated. Interestingly, the very first research project I ever did before I was involved in brain research, I was just working in a research lab, was for pilots who were flying a really difficult flight simulator at Northrop Aircraft Corporation. And these were really good test pilots, and we gave them really difficult problems to solve while they were flying the simulator. And then we'd freeze and blank out their screen and ask them questions about their awareness, their situational awareness, about how much fuel they had and all of that, where the bogies were, how far they were from base. And those that were doing the best had the most of this alpha rhythm, which is the dozing rhythm. So,
While flying?
yes. The
Whoa.
ones that were doing the best were the ones that were most relaxed in their brain
Interesting.
pattern. And the ones that were doing the worst were the ones that looked most alert, awake, engaged, involved.
That's really
isn't
interesting.
that interesting?
Now, would you call that the zone?
Yeah, I think that's what you would call that. They were in the zone.
That's really interesting. So needless to say, I'm not a fighter pilot. I don't play professional sports, but I do play video games. And every now and then you find yourself in a position where you can just read the map effortlessly. You know where people are going to be. It feels so different. It feels awesome, first of all.
Yeah.
Your reflexes, your ability to just intuit where things are going to be happening at. That's really interesting that most closely mimics the first stage of sleep. I would not have guessed that.
I know.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so stage 1, we're in an alpha wave phase, which you would liken to being more relaxed.
Relaxed, yeah.
Okay, but
And-
we are asleep. at that point?
No, it's called stage 1 because it's a transition between wakefulness and sleep. Actually, we have found in my research lab that one of the first things that turns off, quote unquote off, or changes mode, is the hippocampus, which is involved in learning and memory. And that goes to sleep minutes before the rest of our brain does.
Even though in the night I'm going to be consolidating my memories.
Yeah. So I say turned off, but in fact it's not turning off. It's just turning off to learning new things coming in from the outside world.
Okay, so that was one of the questions I was going to ask you later, but this now feels like the perfect time. Can we learn things at night? Could I play a calculus book and wake up better at math?
It would not be, no.
Okay.
That would not be a good idea.
Just there's nothing that you can do. If you're sleeping, that's off.
You really want to turn off to the outside world in order to consolidate the things that you learned all day long. So there is just like there's a time for everything, there's a season for everything. You want to turn off what's coming in from the outside world so that you can process what you already have.
Interesting. I have a conundrum for you.
Okay.
I work a lot. While I love what I do, it can be very stressful. And in the last few years, I've been working so much that it was just completely disrupting my sleep, and it was miserable. It would take me 8 hours to get 5 hours of sleep.
Wow.
And it was really not fun. And there were times where if I was getting my hair cut, if I stopped moving, I would just start falling asleep.
Yeah.
Absolutely miserable. I hated it.
Yeah.
And I'm somebody who prioritizes sleep. So I don't have an alarm set, nothing. I'm going to bed, but I just could not shut off my brain. I couldn't get into that where I felt relaxed enough to fall asleep, or I would fall asleep, but then wake up after 1 to 2 cycles. And then I would be awake for 2 hours is about normal.
Right.
And then, so by the time I fell back asleep, I did not feel good. I was
Yeah.
tired all the time. So one day, I don't even remember what made me try this. I started listening to an audiobook, Out Like a Light.
Yeah.
I would wake up, fall back to sleep within 30 seconds. I mean, just magically delicious.
Right. Yeah.
But I've got the outside world coming in.
Yeah.
So
It's not a pressing out. So I think what that audiobook, is it helped distract your mind from the loop it was in, like, oh, I've got to do this and this, and did I tell somebody to do this? Or so it distracts your mind from those alerting and alarming things that were keeping you awake, and instead let the trail of consciousness follow this story that wasn't going to affect you one way or another. And that was enough to allow your parasympathetic nervous system to relax as you relaxed and enjoyed the story, and then sleep could just take over. And I do the same thing. I don't do podcasts because I'm interested in every story. I just play a kind of a mindless little video game on, a math video game.
And your mind doesn't spark back up when you put that down and go to sleep?
No, I just basically thank the video game for making me sleepy, and just I don't do a lot. I don't take my thing and walk to another room and put it away. I just
set it down,
lay it down, and sometimes I don't even get that far. It falls onto my pillow.
That's hilarious. Okay, so stage 1, alpha, relaxed. We can begin to tune out the outside world, and our alerting mind begins to quiet. The hippocampus switches into some other
internal mode. Yep.
And can you actually see the hippocampus change its wave pattern, electrical pattern?
Yeah.
What do we?
Yeah.
Is it a wave pattern or an electrical
It
pattern?
is a electrical wave pattern.
Okay, so same.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, and then how long are we in stage 1?
So we're in stage 1 just for a few minutes, 5 minutes.
Very quick.
Yeah, very quick. And then we go into stage 2, which has called K complexes and spindles, which are bigger waves where all the neurons are silent and then they're all active at the same time. And then spindles are a little buzz of activity that come once every 10 seconds or so, and they last about 1.5 seconds, something like that. It's 10 to 15 cycles per second, and it starts small and it builds up and then it goes small again.
Unless you smoke weed, and then you get these weird monster spindles
Yes.
that we're unsure what they do, which will be something I'm sure we will get into later because I have a wife that likes to partake.
Yeah.
Okay, so the brain is pulsing, which is very interesting. Is that because of the need for the glial system to clean out?
Yeah, that's actually mostly happening in the deeper stage of sleep. We call it
Okay,
deeper.
so this is different.
Yeah, this is stage 3. So stage 2 is what we're talking about now.
So
is
what's
spindles.
the pulsing then?
So the K complexes are, we don't know exactly. In animals, they are married to something that also starts during that state, which is called P waves. These are big excitatory drives from inside of our own brainstem that go to our forebrain. So K complexes and P waves may or may not, there's some controversy, be the same thing, but they're big glutamatergic drives. It also happens because our thalamus, which is our gateway of consciousness, it's kind of sitting right in the middle of our brain and allows the outside information to reach our cortex. It relays it. It starts to close and become more hyperpolarized, more negative. And
what does that mean? I don't understand.
That means so our neurons are electrical as well as chemical, and the inside of the neuron is very negative related to the outside. The electrical potential is very negative. And when outside information comes in, it's excitatory. So it actually makes the inside of the cell more positive. And then when it gets to a threshold, when it gets so positive, it gets to a threshold, which is negative 55 millivolts, then it fires an action potential. A whole lot of things that are voltage dependent open up. So sodium channels open, allow a lot of sodium to come in to really depolarize, and that's called an action potential. And each one of those are the ways one neuron communicates with the next neuron, and how our whole brain works together, and why we can see these electrical patterns, because the more neurons that are involved in firing at the same time, the more our electrodes that are out here on our skull can see this positive potential go by. And then as they're all falling silent and becoming negative together, you can see this negative potential. And so
so if you had to guess, is there a metronome effect going on? Is it trying to synchronize something?
It is kind of like a metronome in that it's also a positive feedback. So you have all the neurons firing at the same time, and then there's a bunch of other things happen once they fire. They're things that close, that are deactivated, and then everything becomes negative together. And then when it becomes negative enough, there are other voltage-dependent channels that open, and all becomes positive. And then,
do we have this kind of synchronicity when we're awake?
In some places, yeah. For example, if you're walking or doing anything rhythmic, moving your body, there's a lot of synchronicity in your spinal cord that allows that to be a rhythmic and normal movement. Fishes swimming.
Interesting, but we don't yet know why that metronome is going off.
We don't, but when I started 30-something years ago, we really didn't. We thought maybe it was just something that was a signature of something else going on. But now we know that actually that synchronous firing and synchronous silence that happens during this non-REM, we call it non-REM stage of sleep, could be the thing that actually cleans our brain. And these P waves, these big excitatory P waves, target a different part of our brain than our thalamus during wakefulness targets. And the part of the brain that it targets is out in the parts of the brain that form our schema, where cortex talks to cortex instead of outside world talking to
And this
our
is
brain.
coming from the brainstem.
Comes from the brainstem. The excitatory urge comes from the brainstem, and it targets out these cortical connection points.
So I imagine this is very conserved over evolution.
Yeah, it appears to be. Zebrafish. There are animals that don't have much of a cortex, but they still have sleep.
That's really interesting. So there's probably something very ancient, very primordial that this is going to end up being tied to versus something in the neocortex, which is more a higher level cognition, probably not memory. So
In our
guessing
neocortex,
here, or would it be, because I guess every animal would need to go, hey, I learned this. Food is here. This movement worked.
Yeah.
That thing's a predator.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Even
that was
fruit flies.
completely false on my part.
Well, no. I mean, the reason why we can't measure these same brainwave activities in a fruit fly is because even though they have a lot of neurons that help them move and interact with the world, they're not layered in the same way. So in our cortex, all the neurons are lined up, and then these electrical potentials that I'm talking about work like a battery. When the battery is lined up the right way, you can see the electrical potential. But if they're all jumbled relative to one another, even though they might all be firing and silent at the same time, the way that the electricity is flowing is this way in this neuron and this way in that neuron, and waves cancel each other out. So we can't see it. But,
Right. Okay,
it's still
so
there.
that's stage 2. Is what stage is memory consolidation happening versus forgetting? I assume they're at different stages.
Yeah. So that stage 2 is part of consolidation, those big excitatory waves and those sleep spindles, where our cortex is telling other parts of our cortex, or our hippocampus, which is kind of the short-term memory structure, is telling our cortex, hey, this is what I learned today, and teaching it. And so that happens in that stage 2. In stage 3, that's when we have those big slow waves that sweep through regularly. Stage 2, we have those K complexes, which are big waves, but they come, once every 10 seconds or so. And sleep spindles, which come once every 10 seconds or so. But in that deep slow wave stage of sleep, they're coming all the time. There's still, each one comes once a second or so, but that's probably where they're all firing together and they're all quiet together, and that creates, when a neuron fires, not only is there electricity and neurochemicals that are released, but also when it fires, when all the sodium is rushing into the cell expands because it brings water with it. And so it's actually, all the cells are expanding and contracting at the same time, which could create a pump like action, pumping out the debris and the waste into our lymphatic system to clean our brain. And that is probably one of the functions.
Of stage 3 specifically?
Yeah, of stage 3 specifically.
Okay, so when we think about neurodegenerative diseases, you hear a lot about beta amyloid plaques building up, tau proteins, things like that. One, where do those come from? And B, it seems like, because I know we were talking earlier, but also knowing your research, that as we get into like really bad neurodegenerative diseases, they're also going to have massive sleep disruption.
Yeah.
So what are the amyloid plaques? What are the tau proteins?
Yeah.
Why do they matter? Why do we have to clean them out every night?
Right.
Do they serve a function? Are they all bad?
What's up, guys? It's Tom Bilyeu, and if you're anything like me, you're always looking for ways to level up your mindset, your business, and your life in general. That's exactly why I started Impact Theory, a podcast that brings together the world's most successful and inspiring people to share their stories and, most importantly, strategies for success. And now it's easier than ever to listen to Impact Theory on Amazon Music. Whether you're on the go or chilling at home, you can simply open up the Amazon Music app and search for Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu to start listening right away. If you really want to take things to the next level, just ask Alexa. Hey Alexa, play Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu on Amazon Music.
Now playing Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu on Amazon Music.
And boom, you're instantly plugged into the latest and greatest conversations on mindset, health, finances, and entrepreneurship. Get inspired, get motivated, and be legendary with Impact Theory on Amazon Music. Let's do this.
No. We need them. We couldn't survive or learn or do well without them. It's kind of like, I guess, you could sort of think of it as making the mess on our desk as we work during the day, right? And we need that to do the business that we're doing, but we also need to clean it up. every night so that the next day we can come in and be organized and efficient and know where things are. So it's a normal part of being awake is phosphorylating this tau, and it helps us to carry things where they need to go. Same with amyloid proteins. We have to have them, but it's when they become a mess, misfolded, and a mess that if we don't clean it up, it starts to gunk up our office of our brain, and then we can't find anything, and our neurons aren't working like they're supposed to. It becomes less and less efficient.
That stuff is very interesting to me, especially as it relates to metabolic disease and whether Alzheimer's is metabolic disease in the brain. I'm curious, before we get into stage 4, how much of what's going on in here is tied to metabolism? Because I know if you mess up your sleep, you're going to notice it immediately in your metabolic response.
It really is the first thing that gets messed up is your metabolism. And you get 4 a.m, you get hungry for junk food because your body says, I'm not efficiently processing, energy anymore, and I need more of it. So one of the first things that happens when we go to sleep is we convert the free adenosine that's been freed through the process of metabolism. It gets built back into ATP, which are these packets of energy that our whole body uses. So that is a very important part. And when we sleep deprive ourselves, our adenosine builds up and up and up and up the longer we're awake. That's what caffeine does. It blocks the receptors for those adenosines, so we don't know how long we've been awake, and we don't feel the signal that we're sleepy. But caffeine doesn't help us to change free adenosine back to ATP. And that happens very slowly and inefficiently when we're awake, but really well and quickly when we're asleep.
That's interesting. So basically Is the adenosine like a hormone where the body's like, I'm going to do this because I need you to go back to sleep? And so it's just sort of a clock, and it just produces it, and it knows, you'll hit this sense that I must go to sleep, and then cool, like it's done its job, I'm going to take it all back, and then, okay, you're awake, and I'm going to pump it back out? Or does it have some other function and sleep is just a byproduct?
It's freed up because of the process of energy use. So ATP, adenosine triphosphate, when we
utilize the ATP, it basically kicks that off.
It kicks that off.
Interesting.
And then it goes from triphosphate to diphosphate to monophosphate to just free adenosine.
And then we grab it again and reattach it to ATP. Wow.
Our mitochondria are working hard to
talk about a very simple thing that I've never put together. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. That's why power naps are power naps. Because
you can quickly grab some of that free adenosine, turn it into ATP. Right. That is so interesting. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
And better than a cup of coffee because it's actually building back our energy.
Right. Okay, so the cup of coffee is bamboozling you, so you don't feel that you're tired, but the power nap is actually creating ATP with the free adenosine, so you're lowering the level that tells you that you're tired, and you're actually producing energy.
Yeah.
Very interesting, but I also know that you've talked about that some people naps don't work, so why? That seems weird.
We don't know. We don't know yet. It's also true that some people don't get all of the health benefits of exercise. There are just a variety of people out there. Yeah, I know.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah. Some people, they can exercise all they want. They could train for a marathon, and it's not doing the repair and benefits for the body that other people does. So
that's really interesting. I should not be surprised. Everything, we're so individualized.
Yeah, different from one another.
That is horrifying to think that you could be doing all of that, because I absolutely despise working out. You could be doing all that work and not seeing all of the benefit. I'm sure you get some, but
I'm sure you get some.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's more to go into there, but I think it's probably better to wrap up stage 4, and then we can sort of circle back and get into some of these things, especially what we can do to optimize this stuff.
Right. So
what's
stage 3, stage 4, they're really the same thing. They've been collapsed into one because
So
they're really
you guys
degrees.
don't talk about 4 stages anymore?
Oh no, the fourth stage being REM sleep, but it's not called
Okay.
stage 4. It's just called REM.
Interesting.
Rapid eye movement sleep. Yeah.
So you're still technically in stage 3?
No, you've just completely switched out of stage 3 and you're in a completely thing entirely. REM sleep is also called paradoxical sleep because our cortex looks like we're awake and there's so much activity.
Is that why it's not considered stage 4? Because it's just so different?
Yeah, stage 1, 2, 3 are all kind of sort of degrees of depth. Our thalamus, that thalamic gate, becomes less and less aware of the world outside of us. I don't know. That's maybe a misnomer too. It's not even. Stage 2 and stage 3 are so different from one another too, in terms of what neurotransmitters are there and what's not there. So we did say, oh, this is how you're marching into sleep. But in fact, we now know as of recently that stage 2 and stage 3 are entirely different from one another as wakefulness is from any other state of sleep.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay, that's unexpected.
Yeah.
Okay, and then stage 4 is different than all of them.
Yeah,
and
it's
it looks like we're more wakeful. So describe what is going on in REM.
Yeah.
Why is it so weird? Why do we dream? I mean, this is the weird one for me.
Right. We're, again, closed to the outside world. Instead, we're internally generating our own reality. And that reality is unreal. You know, it's some things that can't happen in the outside world. What we do know is we are generating an internal state, this dream state, all of these dreams. And what those dreams allow us to do is things that we can't do during wakefulness, fly or, become monsters or fight monsters or play out all kinds of scenarios in fast kind of forward motion that we can't do. And if we did, we might put ourselves at risk. But because we're safe in our beds, not acting out our dreams, we can safely do these things. And so, so it helps our brain to expand and be imaginative and work through complicated problems and put things together that don't make any sense during wakefulness when our logic and judgment and decision-making brain reigns, well, hopefully reigns. Instead, we can play out all kinds of crazy scenarios that may allow us to put things together that we wouldn't otherwise.
That's very interesting. So are you saying that your hypothesis is that by having what I'll call a narrative component, I don't know if you'd use those words, but by having a narrative component, we go into a more creative state where we can connect ideas that somehow when we wake is going to be useful?
Well, yeah. So that's the really cool thing about this dream state is our brains are learning. It's learning from itself.
In the dream state.
In the dream state, we are learning, and our brain is learning from itself.
But not in the way that I'm consolidating memories and quote unquote learning. This is a different type of learning.
You're creating new knowledge, but
how do you
from
measure
things
that?
you already know. Well, we can measure the synapses and the synaptic strengths and which synapses are strengthened and which are weakened.
Interesting. So when you say learning, you mean mechanistically.
Yeah.
Neurons are wiring together in the same way that they would if I were to learn a math problem or how to solve a math problem. And those neurons would be strengthened.
Yeah. I mean, it's really powerful. They call it plastic state. So it's just as plastic as when we're most alert and learning the best during the daytime. But the one thing that you can do during that dream state you can't do during wakefulness is you can do erasure. So you can delete and eliminate pathways that no longer work for us or are redundant.
And that happens during REM.
Only during REM sleep. Yeah.
I don't understand why that would happen while I'm telling myself some acid-induced bizarro narrative. I mean, I don't remember many of my dreams, but the one I remember, they're so weird that I'm just like, how is this the time and place that I'm going, hey, you know that thing, you don't use that anymore, let's prune that out.
Yeah.
Do we have any sense of why those two happen at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's because... well, one thing that needs to happen is we need to prune those redundant pieces of information away. Otherwise, we would just saturate our brains with irrelevant pieces of information and even wrong things that we should tag at least to say, yes, I used to believe this, but now I know it's wrong. So it's REM sleep that you can reduce the weight of those things. So it's not the first thing you think of when, someone asks you, where did you park your car yesterday? It's, or last night. It's not the place you parked it last week or the month before. It's where you parked it yesterday. So you need to prune those things away so you know what's current and what's here now. So it's the novelty encoding parts of your brain that get pruned. And the reason why that's possible is because that's the state in which brain stem area called the locus ceruleus, which provides norepinephrine, another word for it is noradrenaline to our brain, that only it only puts us in the go mode. It only puts us in the strengthen. When we're awake, when we're asleep, it's gone. And so that's the only time. And during REM sleep, it's when it's really gone. And you can say yes to these things and no to these things. Be selective. It's kind of like, during the daytime, you have a housewarming party and your guests are bringing all kinds of things into your house, right? House plants and dishes and all of that. And yes, you accept all of these things when you're awake, but you unwrap them in your when you build proteins in that stage 2 and stage 3 sleep. And then during REM sleep, you put them where they go and you throw out the things that they replace. These new things replace.
Man, this is so interesting to me. I have a hypothesis for you.
Okay.
Let me know. This could be so absurd, but I love talking to people that really know their stuff, so you can correct me where I go wrong. When I'm teaching students about business, I'm always trying to get them to understand that you have all these dots, your market, what you're trying to sell them, what you think they want, how you think you're going to get there, the state of the economy, all this stuff. And your job is to connect those dots with a narrative, which I'll call your schema for how to move your business forward.
Right.
The problem is the only thing I can tell you is that your schema is wrong, but you need one in order to move forward with conviction.
Yeah.
And if you don't move forward with conviction, then you'll fall prey to what most businesses fall prey to, which is doing nothing is the only sin. So if you do nothing, you'll get bowled over by all the other people that find a way to move forward with like real conviction.
Yeah.
And so when you are getting your team on board, you're going to only talk narrative. You're going to talk about how the dots connect. But when you're alone, you need to come back out to just dots and see if there's another way to connect these in a more efficient narrative.
Yeah.
And so getting them to understand the brain is a predictive engine. And when you are able to predict the outcome of your behaviors, you're closer to ground truth. When you can't predict the outcome of your behaviors, you have a flaw in the model.
Yeah.
Man, I'm grasping at straws here, but this makes a lot of internal sense to me. That if in the REM state, what my brain is doing is going, your schema is held together with this narrative.
Yeah.
But for a minute, I need to come back out to just dots. There's no logic. And so when I hit that point where it's just dots, I'm having these weird dreams. Like I had a dream once where it was raining corpses. No idea what that meant. But I'm back out to there's no coherent logical cohesion between these.
Right.
But my brain is now removing things that haven't been serving me.
Yeah.
And then is going to reconsolidate all this back into a updated schema when I wake.
Yeah, exactly. I think you got it.
That's really interesting. If that holds true, like that really makes sense to me from just how the world works.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so now talk to me. Is there a correlation between either or both schizophrenia and a dreamlike state, or psychedelics and a dreamlike state?
Yeah. Yes. The answer is yes. So schizophrenia is long interested sleep researchers because the hallucinations are so much like what hallucinations we experience when we're dreaming. And so it was thought to be a dreamlike state, right? Interestingly, the only real difference that you can see in the brains of people with schizophrenia, well, there are two things. One is during wakefulness, your gamma, which is the cortical connectivity, is slightly different in frequency. It changes a little bit, almost as though we're being more driven by an internal cortical connection, like we are during REM sleep. And then the second is we don't have those beautiful sleep spindles that I talked about. So people
explain to people. So spindles are way too connected to intelligence.
Yeah.
I always get very uneasy with stuff like this.
Yeah.
Or I want to know, can I somehow make more of them? Like,
right. Well, the reason why you probably get uncomfortable is because we don't really have a good grasp of what intelligence is. We just we know there are different kinds of intelligences, and we know that our ways of testing them are very, very flawed. But intelligence is, broadly speaking, what you talked about earlier, which is a way to absorb information, process it, form a schema, and use that schema the next time you encounter the world. So it's a way to use what you know in a very efficient fashion, perhaps is the way you could think about it.
If you had to guess, if you could turn a dial and increase the amount of spindles that somebody has, would they get smarter?
Okay. Yes. However, let me qualify that. It's not just spindles. Like you said, cannabis, increases the length of spindles and can almost replace all of REM sleep with spindles. But it's what's going on during those spindles. The timing is everything. So it's when neurons fire in relation to spindles. It's the neurochemicals that are present or absent during spindles that allows us to reshape our schema. And so it's not just the rhythm itself. It's what's going on in the background of that rhythm or on top of those rhythms or because of those rhythms. That's the important thing. So I think I'm a little wary of devices, for example, that's going to externally cause your brain to fire in a 10 to 15 hertz spindle fashion, because if the rest of your brain isn't doing what it's supposed to do, it's not in the state it's supposed to be in, it's not going to do you any good. And in fact, it probably could do more harm than good. So.
Interesting. I've heard you talk about that the brain, the systems are never that simple. It's like there's redundancies in the systems, and depending on context, it could be seeming to do the same thing, but in fact, it's actually doing the reverse. So all very, very complicated. But going back to schizophrenia and psychedelics. So what have we found? Is it a dreamlike state, and that's why they're hallucinating and the wires are just getting crossed? Or
I think it might be a dreamlike state because that stage 2 sleep spindle state isn't doing what needs to happen, which is updating your schema with the information that you learned during the day. So
why would that result in hallucinations?
So, I just had a really fascinating conversation with an undergraduate at UCLA who's really interested in schizophrenia and sleep. And it might be that your distal cortical communication is happening without instruction. So it's without that instruction, say, where the hippocampus can tell the brain, this is what we learned today. This is now, we got to tag this with false, and this is true, and we've got to refresh. And all of that happening during those sleep spindles when the cortex is teaching, the hippocampus is teaching the cortex what it knows. Instead, you're staying in perhaps a REM-like state in that you're doing all of these free associations, you're backing out, you see the dots and not the schema anymore, like you said. And but that's happening without the organization step of this is what I've learned today first. So
the brain is talking to itself, but the brain doesn't recognize I'm talking to myself.
Yeah.
And so it's misinterpreting this is a signal coming from the outside, when in reality it's a signal coming from the inside.
I that was the latest revelation that I had with this undergraduate. It's people with schizophrenia, the more schizotypic they are, the more they can tickle themselves. And,
That's revelatory.
Isn't
Explain
that-
what that means.
well, because we can't tickle ourselves, because when we do this to ourselves, we have what's called an efference copy. So our brain, our motor cortex says, I'm doing this, I'm getting close to my shoulder, and we can expect it. And the thing about tickles, that it's an unexpected, one of the things about tickles, it's unexpected. And so we can't. But if you don't have that feedback from the outside, your brain telling you this is coming from inside of me and not from the outside.
That gave me the chills.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Wow. So they can tickle themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they have completely lost track. Is this inside or outside?
Mm-hmm.
Whoa. Do we have any sense of how you reestablish that connection?
That's a microcircuit question, and that's something that my lab is also looking to, and a lot of other labs too. But so there are sort of two compartments of our neurons, that are listening to the outside world. So one, the proximal compartment that's really close to the cell body, is where the outside world talks to our cortex and puts that new information. And then the distal parts of the antenna, which are called dendrites, are where the cortical information comes in. And normally when we're awake, our whole brain chemistry weights things to be more attuned to what's coming in from the outside world. And yes, there can be definitely, thankfully, some modification of that based on our schema and the distal dendrites information where cortex is talking to cortex. But mostly the two compartments are very separated from one another. They're physically separated from one another. They're chemically separated from one another. They're anatomically, connectivity-wise, separate from each other. And then during sleep, during this REM state and the spindle state, we switch from that internally or that externally focused novelty encoding proximal, close to cell body circuit to paying more attention to what's going on in the distal cortical circuit. And so, and what mitigates that, what switches us from this to that, is a thing called interneurons, which are inhibitory interneurons, which during wakefulness kind of inhibit that cortical input to some degree in a very regulated and rhythmic fashion. That's what sets up that gamma rhythm that I talked about, that's different in people with schizophrenia, these interneurons. And it's really these interneurons that seem to not be as viable in people with schizophrenia. So if somehow you can restore the health of these interneurons and restore how they're connected with the circuit, they can switch us from external to internal in a fashion that makes sense with what's actually going on in the world around us.
And have we seen any impact on diet? Is anybody looking at that?
Of course, diet affects everything. Neurotransmitters and the cofactors, the coenzymes are all part of that. I don't know myself of any studies about diet, but one thing that will definitely cause people with schizophrenia or the tendency to have schizophrenia to tip them over into a break is alcohol. And
doesn't weed also have, I've heard people say like, yo, need to be very careful.
Yeah, and it's probably because it's messing up with those sleep spindles that we talked about and what's exactly going on.
Is that what alcohol is doing?
Alcohol inhibits the stage, it interferes with our sleep. It makes our sleep not do what it's supposed to do. So during those deep slow wave sleep, the timing of things isn't right. Alcohol affects our interneurons big time. It's a GABA agonist, which is the neurotransmitter that interneurons use. And so it falsely clamps things down when they shouldn't be clamped down. It takes our forebrain offline, which is why we become so
I was going to say, it's
silly.
part of the fun.
Yeah, part of the fun.
Yeah.
but yeah, so and so it interferes with our sleep. And I think if your sleep is already compromised when you have schizophrenia, you don't have good sleep spindles in the first place, it might be that you're able to hang on to reality just barely, tooth and nail, by the few sleep spindles that you get, and then alcohol wipes those out. And so then you go from the edge of barely hanging on to tip over to the side of hallucinations and all of the
That's
positive
so
symptoms.
interesting. This is a random side note, but I have a friend whose brother is paranoid schizophrenic. And he said he spent like a year. He had to move back home, spent a year tracking his brother down, finally found him. His brother was convinced like the French or Italian government were after him. And he was, running from like underpass to underpass, trying to like keep away from the satellites, being able to read his mind. Well, wait though, it gets stranger. He finds his brother, gets him back on his medication. His brother then develops secondary depression. And while taking the medication is able to explain, this is less fun than being a paranoid schizophrenic because at least then I mattered. Then like the governments were after me. I was like of central importance and every day my life mattered and I was running. He stops taking his medication and goes back onto the street. And I was like, whoa. Like the brain is complicated. And to think that, I mean, look, it clearly there's something just misfiring. It's not working the way that it should. But I kind of got what he was saying. I was like, wow, to feel like I matter more than anybody else and like everything is about me and governments are after me. I was like, that's spy versus spy. It's
I don't think we as humans need to matter to the whole world. We just need to matter
look,
to
I'm
somebody.
not trying to celebrate or say that schizophrenia sounds amazing. Not at all.
No, but I think this touches on a
fascinating.
very basic human need, which is that we need to matter to one another. We need to matter to somebody. And I think that's, as a parent, that's the best thing we can give our child is the knowledge that we matter. We matter to them at least, and that we can make a difference in the world, that our actions matter, that we can make the world a better place, and that they hope and expect us to do that. And so that connection between it, I mean, we are social animals. And just like other social animals, we're not the only social animals in the world. There are lots of social animals. We need our clan. We need each other. And when we feel like we don't matter and nobody cares, depression definitely sets in. I think this was a major problem during the pandemic when we were all isolated from each other, especially those people who lived alone. I mean, wow, we are social animals. That is a fundamental part of who we are. Thank God for the telephone. Thank God for Zoom. Thank God that we could at least see each other in some way and tell each other that we matter to one another. But I totally get what this friend of yours or this, felt.
That's crazy.
And I think that may be one way to help people stay on their meds is let them know that they do matter. Show them that they do matter.
That's really well said.
Even if they're not the central character
big
of
government
this
conspiracy.
of this big government conspiracy. If you matter to somebody, your nieces and nephews, your brothers and sisters, your mother and father, I think that could make the difference.
All right, let's go dark for a second.
All right.
If we had to break somebody, like really break them, isolate them or deprive them of sleep?
I think sleep would do it faster.
Can you kill somebody by not letting them sleep?
Yeah.
That's bananas.
Yeah. Well,
How
because
long does it take?
Oh gosh, no one's never done that I know of in humans. In other mammals, it's 5 weeks, something like that.
Whoa. I can't. That does not sound fun.
No.
So what ends up happening? What's the mechanism by which you end up breaking?
It's because sleep has so many functions, it's not even clear what the mechanism is. But
do they get organ failure?
Yeah. Multiple organ failure, immune system degeneration, lesions, sepsis, all kinds of different things would kill you. Just kind of like COVID and other very bad viruses. They target different organs depending on who you are and what state they're in. So sleep deprivation will target different organs, and where you're most vulnerable will be the one that hurts you fastest.
Wow. What does that process look like? Because you don't go from I'm a little tired to I'm dead. Like, do they start hallucinating? Do they start just like...
Well, people will. I mean, people have self-deprived or have been unfortunately deprived of sleep, and hallucinations are part of it, yeah. Hunger your metabolism goes haywire and you get super hungry and you'll continue to lose weight.
You'll lose weight
With long-term sleep deprivation. Yeah.
even if you're eating.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So there was one women's magazine who talked to this researcher and said, hey, even though I could eat whatever I want and still
God.
lose weight if I lose, and he said, no, but you'll be ugly. Because your skin doesn't, refresh
Jesus,
and
I
renew.
can't imagine.
Yeah, I mean, you'll be cranky and just not look good, not feel good. It's not a good thing. And then type 2 diabetes, insulin regulation goes haywire. One night of full sleep deprivation will set you on the path toward type 2 diabetes. So, you want to get your sleep.
No joke.
Yeah, I think actually probably the Nobel Prize winning discovery about the function of sleep, being that it's important for every single living creature, is that it's metabolism. I think it's the mitochondria and the repair of the mitochondria.
Is that you're saying that will happen?
I will. I think, I know a few researchers that are looking to sleep in mitochondria, and I think that's where the money is. I mean, cognition, yes, we all want to learn better and understand better, but I think the essential life-sustaining function of sleep has to do with energy.
That's interesting. So knowing the little bit about mitochondria that I know, they have their own DNA. What's going on at the level of sleep that would impact this little organelle that should have its own setup and its own system?
It repairs itself.
So why does my as if I could exist without them, but why does my sleep affect mitochondria so profoundly that you see a Nobel Prize coming?
Yeah, well, okay, so think of sleep as, I think of it as a washing machine. If you don't clean your clothes, ultimately they'll get gunked up, heavy, dirty, won't do their insulation function. They won't help you function. If you get sleep but it's messed up, it's like putting your clothes in the washing machine but interrupting the cycle, putting all the clothes soaking wet or whatever. So one of the functions of sleep is to actually repair our DNA. And if we can't do that when we're awake, we just can't. So we need to put it in the washing machine. We need to do the things that we do.
So DNA repair isn't happening like at all times? It's primarily at night?
Well, no.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I understand how the brain cleans itself with the pump that you're talking about, where I'm basically expanding and contrasting. And when I contract, it's pulling things in. And then when I expand, it's letting everything wash out.
Yeah.
So that I get how there's a mechanistic thing, and that I can only do that when I basically put my body down so that I'm not going to fall off something or whatever while my brain is going through the cycle. But at the DNA cellular level, is there some resource that the cell has to do while it's awake and that it stops doing at night?
Yeah, it's like again, like the washing machine. There are things that need to be coordinated and together and timed well.
That metronome.
Yeah, it really is. It's timing is everything. So things are happening during waking that allows wakefulness to be waking, like norepinephrine allows us to be alert and awake and attending to the outside world. And when it's present while we sleep, which happens sometimes in insomnia, especially stress-related insomnia, you can have sleep, but your norepinephrine system is still going. Post-traumatic stress disorder also. Your sleep, all of the elements that need to be there to do the job efficiently aren't there, or things are in the way, they're in the way that shouldn't be in the way, so it's less efficient and doing its job less well.
Okay, so now going back to mitochondria and the energy system, sleep playing a primary role in that. So I've heard people say that fat loss happens at night. You think it happens when you're exercising, but in reality it doesn't. What do you think is going on with the energy system at night that is so profoundly important?
Well, I actually don't know, and that's why I think it's in the future.
Love me some guesses.
Yeah. So guessing, there are different things, hormones, cortisol, growth hormone, all of these things change with the sleep-wake cycle and with the circadian cycle. So again, it's also better to go to sleep when your circadian cycles and your sleep needs are joined at the same time. So better to sleep at night and expose ourselves to light during the day to help coordinate our circadian and sleep needs together. So growth hormone is one of those things that gets released in a big bolus when we're asleep at the right time. And if we miss that, we won't have that big bolus of growth hormone. And a big bolus does a different thing than eking out over time.
So even if it was the same amount over a 24-hour period, very different impact than the same amount primarily over an 8-ish hour period.
Yeah, and you can understand that because, for example, the reproductive cycle also depends on boluses of hormones being released at the right time. If you get a bolus released at a time when the rest of your system isn't ready, it won't produce a fertile situation. And if instead of a bolus you just eke out a little bit all the time, you also won't develop the follicle and release the egg, that sort of thing. So there's a difference in a bolus versus just a little bit over time. That, and it has to be done in a coordinated fashion.
Yeah, that coordination thing, that's coming up a lot.
Yeah.
I had never really thought about that before. That makes a lot of sense. Take the body offline, coordinate everything all at once. Hey, quick. It's kind of like Disneyland. I don't know why this is coming to me. When they, switch over all their lights and they turn on the Christmas season or whatever, it's like all at night, everybody descends, boom, boom, boom. You do it really fast. Well, nobody's there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. If you tried all those workers, you tried to do that with all those workers while the guests were in the park, it would be chaos, right? People couldn't find their rides. The workers couldn't get to, take down the big things they need to take down and bring in the big trucks to bring in the big Christmas tree or whatever at Disneyland. You need that to be timed right. Exactly.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Okay, so talk to me about optimized sleep. It literally can kill you if you don't get it. So how do we make sure that we're not just getting it, but we're really getting it in the right way, the right amounts?
Yeah.
How do we prepare?
Well, our bodies are built to optimize our own physiology. So if you listen to your body, you'll be all right.
Which so few people do.
do.
Myself included until I really started taking it seriously.
Right, yeah. If you're studying calculus and you're trying to absorb this information and you get overwhelmed with a sense of sleepiness, listen to your body. Put your head down on your textbook if you want to. Take a nap, because during that time your brain is doing what it needs to do, which is start to put this new information into your schema and build it. And if you deny yourself of that, you won't learn as well. Similarly, if you're feeling sick and you want to go to bed, go to bed. Don't just take a bunch of pills and make yourself go through the day, because that sleep is actually doing what your body needs, which is restoring your immune system and helping it to work well. Similarly, after getting a vaccine, people feel a little sick often and want a good night's sleep. Get that good night's sleep, because it's been shown that if you don't get a good night's sleep after you get a vaccine, it's 50% as effective, if anything. So listen to your body. Do what it says to do.
Now, I will say there was a time when I was, in my early 20s where my body told me, stay up later, stay up later, stay up later. And it got to the point where I had to set an alarm to make a 10 p.m. movie.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I felt so weird.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully, my body then told me, not seeing the sunlight is very weird.
Yeah.
You need to flip your schedule. And so I went back. But that was really me doing what felt natural.
Yeah.
And my schedule got pushed back.
Well, I think that's because you weren't exposing yourself to the outside light in the morning, like when it needs to be. But that means that people can listen to their body and get
in the wrong place.
Yeah.
So when we think about sleep hygiene, when we think about the optimal, like what you would do with your kids to make sure that they were on track, how would you have people shape themselves? Is it light in the morning? Is it going to bed at a certain time?
Yeah. And I think, back when we were more agrarian culture, that wasn't a problem. I mean, you just couldn't do that much at night. But now we have computers and false lights and all of this stuff. So yeah, we can wedge ourselves into a bad place. But yeah, get outside in the morning, expose yourself to that outside light. There's nothing stronger than the sunlight, even when it's behind a cloud, in resetting our circadian system.
Does it count if you're looking out the window?
Yeah. I mean, just think of in terms of film. You studied film, right? Or you wanted to. You know the light coming through a window is great for a camera versus false lights. You have to spend a lot of energy to try and reproduce the same amount of light. So
does the light need to actually touch your skin? Because it's my understanding that some of the UV light gets bounced back by glass, and so that getting outside does make some difference. I don't know how much amount, but
you know what, getting outside helps for a lot of other things, that like converting to vitamin D that we can use. But the photons, it's actually not UV, it's blue light. Interestingly, 470 nanometers, is that what it is? That is the wavelength of that blue light that really activates our eyes. And that doesn't get filtered unless we have a blue light filter on our glass. So yeah.
So that still would, there might be other things, the sun hitting your skin, it matters, but you're still going to get that alertness signal just by getting enough blue light in your eyes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Do you think it matters like time of day? I've heard Huberman and other people point out that like light is actually sort of qualitatively different early in the morning, that sends certain signals to your brain.
Yeah, it does. So our circadian system is set so that when we see a bright blue light, our circadian system says that's morning. So if you keep yourself indoors all day long and don't go out until the evening, and that's when you get the brightest light, your circadian system says it's morning, and it shifts everything so that becomes your new morning. Your clock gets reset to that light.
Is there any difference pre-sunrise, post-sunrise, or doesn't matter?
So normally when you fall asleep at night, say 10 o'clock at night, you get a big surge of melatonin, and that's the hormone of darkness, it's called. If you at that time expose yourself to bright light, say you've just flown across the Atlantic and now what was 10 o'clock at night is now, 6 o'clock in the morning, your brain will reset your clock to that. Now, it doesn't do it all at once. It can't shift 6 hours at once it needs several days to do that, but it will start switching things so that it says, okay, this is my new morning time. And that's good. We want that, right? We want to be able to inform our brains of what time of day it is and reset that every day. You have your actually own endogenous clock that will free run in absence of any light. So if suddenly someone put you into a cave, you still would have a roughly 24-hour rhythm. It's generally most often a little more than 24 hours, which is
very interesting. I've heard that it's like 25 hours or something.
Yeah, not 25. That's a lot. It's 24.1 to 24.4.
Oh, really? That close?
Yeah, it's pretty close. But a free-running human will go to bed later and later and later every night.
So weird.
Just because our clocks are a little longer than the 24-hour rhythm. And so it needs to be reset every day.
Yeah. Okay, what time should we go to bed?
All right. So say you got up at a good time in the morning, 6, 7.
Why is that a good time?
Well, I'll say it's a good time just because that's when the sun rises and that's when the rhythm of the earth is usually aligned for business and other things that you would need to do. Farming, that's when you would be, that's why it's a good time. I mean, actually, if you're a shift worker and you work at night, don't go outside in the morning. You want to keep yourself in darkness and just switch your whole circadian rhythm so that you expose yourself to bright light in the evening because that's when your circadian rhythm says, oh, okay, this is morning and I'm going to be alert for the next 16 hours. So
Don't shift workers, though, have a higher preponderance of cancer?
yeah, but that's probably because they're incompletely able to do that.
So they've not quite switched over.
Well, and that's often because, unfortunately, the shifts of shift work give them, weekends off. And so then the weekend, they want to be around their family. We're social creatures. They'll get up in the morning. And so every week, your circadian is going back and forth and back and forth. Or some crazy shift working jobs will have you 4 days on and 3 days off. And, it's just, that's not good. So if you can actually set your whole life to this new time, it's fine. It's like you've moved to Europe. I mean,
interesting.
It's fine.
Now, is there data around that? Because I would be very curious to see how the rates of cancer correlate to the level of vitamin D.
Yeah, there are data. On,
and so it doesn't matter. This is really about if you fully shift your schedule, you're going to be fine. The rates of cancer are not elevated anymore.
Right. If you fully switch your schedule, you'll be okay. All your clocks will be aligned. Now, vitamin D is another question, though. That's another thing that you get from the sun. You can take supplements, though. It depends on how well you absorb those particular supplements, what else you're taking in your nutrition at the same time, and whether it blocks that absorption of vitamin D or not. So orange juice and vitamin D don't go together for some reason in our guts. Yeah, milk is fine. Oil-soluble things, but water-soluble things don't.
No good.
Yeah, so anyway, so I would hypothesize that if you're able to replace everything that, including social connections, with that new schedule, then
hang out with other
shift
workers.
Yeah, have a shift working family.
Fair. Okay, so assuming we get up at 6 or 7, then we go to bed at.
So the healthy amount of sleep, the healthiest on a population level, is about 7 to 8 hours. So 7.5 hours to 8 hours with an adult. Children need more. Even teenagers need more. As our brains are developing, there's a lot more demands on sleep that they need. But healthy adults, about 7.5, 8. If you put someone in a quiet, dark room, this is a study done at Wayne State University and Henry Ford Hospital by Tim Rears. If you put someone in a semi-darkened, quiet room with nothing else to do, just a bed and them for 12 hours a day for a month, every single day, people will average out, this is on average, to 8 hours and 15 minutes of sleep per night. And so you can't even oversleep. You can't just say, okay, there's nothing else to do, I'm just going to sleep for 12 hours.
Your body just won't do it.
Your body won't do it. Yeah, once your needs of sleep have been fulfilled, you'll wake up. So
if you've been sleep deprived, though, you would have a period of time where you'll sleep a lot.
And that's what happened in this study. The first week or two of the study, people did sleep quite a lot more, 10 hours of the 12 or more, depending on how sleep deprived they were. But once they fulfilled that sleep debt, 8 hours and 15 minutes. And again, on average, some people slept a lot less, some people slept a lot more, but on average, it was 8 hours and 15 minutes. So the population-based studies show that if you just ask people in chunks, do you sleep 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7, 8, 9 plus, those that have the lowest mortality were the ones that chose the 7 o'clock. So 7 hours. 8 hours also had low, and 6 hours also had low, but around 7 was the best for these adults.
Does it need to be all at once? Can you break it up?
Yeah, there are a lot of cultures that break it up, and they seem to be healthy. They have a nice snap in the middle of the siesta, in the middle of the afternoon, not too late to spoil their sleep that night.
And they'll only sleep 5 or 6 hours during the normal night.
And then they'll make up with another hour and a half or so during the siesta, and that's fine.
And is it true that a sleep cycle is about 90 minutes?
Yeah, on average. The first sleep cycle is more like 105 minutes or so, 110, and then later in the night they're shorter, but On average, it's about 90 minutes.
All right. So what happens then if you start pushing your sleep back? Is there any difference between, so if I normally go to bed at 9 p.m. and then one night I go to bed at 11 p.m., is there going to be a problem?
Yeah.
And does it matter if I just always go to bed at 11? Am I going to be fine?
Yeah. Again, there's that alignment between circadian and homeostatic drive to sleep. If you normally go to bed at 11 and wake up at 7 in the morning, that's a healthy amount of sleep. That's 8 hours, right? And then waking up at 7, that's when you expose yourself to the bright light. Versus those who go to bed at 10 and wake up at 6, they're exposing themselves to brighter light at 6. So the alignment between the circadian and homeostatic needs for sleep are different. So, yeah.
So that's fine. But pushing, if I miss my normal bedtime by 2 hours, am I creating a problem for myself?
Yeah, you are creating a problem for yourself because you're misaligning your circadian and homeostatic needs. And
even if I get so I normally go to bed at 9 and I get 7 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
I go to bed at 11, I still get 7 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
You're saying just because I switched.
Yeah.
What is that knock-on effect?
Well, so say normally you wake up at 6 and you did that morning, wake up at 6, but now you're going to bed at, I don't know, what is, say, 10 to 6, 11. You could say you go to bed at midnight that night, 2 hours later. Your circadian rhythm is set to release your melatonin at the normal time, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And once you're nicely asleep, and it starts building up before that. And so it's trying to do that, but you're still awake and you've got lights exposed. And so your melatonin release has been dampened. And then when you go to bed 2 hours later, you're already past that peak of when your clock says, let's release this melatonin. And so your sleep will be missing that, and you will miss all that growth hormone surge and all of that.
That's why my wife says no matter what time I go to bed, I wake up at the same time. That makes sense because she's doing it as a one-off. Because what will end up happening, I will a little bit, but my wife more than me will stay up quite late on the weekends.
Yeah.
And so because the rest of the week she's on a normal cycle, then she's like, I still wake up at the same time.
Yeah, it's her clock, her circadian system waking her up.
Very interesting. So, okay, to encapsulate, I want to get up at a good time. I want to get light in my eyes. I'm going to be all day, I'm going to be building up the adenosine, which is going to cue me to go to sleep. I want to go to sleep at roughly the same time.
Yeah.
Because all of my circadian rhythms, clocks, everything are used to secreting the different hormones and everything at the same time.
That's
and so
right.
if I'm awake, hey, you missed your window, sorry. It's not like everything just shifts back on a one-off, but I can shift my entire schedule if I want to.
Yeah.
But I do need to be getting somewhere around 7 hours of sleep for optimal longevity.
Yeah.
And certainly I will say for optimal performance, if you're not getting sleep, it just feels so lame.
Yeah.
Oh God, I hate being tired so much.
Yeah.
I do not understand people that chronically sleep deprive themselves. That's just madness from where I'm sitting.
Yeah.
All right, talk to me. What's the difference between the sexes? Do we have different sleep needs? Do we respond differently to perturbations?
Yeah.
How does that all work out?
Yeah, and it seems to be true in every species we've studied. There are sex differences in the amount and the pattern in which we sleep.
Really?
Yeah.
Tied to hormones or what's causing that?
Well, yes. So children, as far as I know, the studies that they, before their hormones kick in, they sleep about the same and their sleep needs are about the same. Once your hormones start kicking in, especially cycling hormones, they definitely affect, so much, including when we are sleepy and how much sleep we need. So as women cycle through the monthly cycle, there will be times when sleep is more elusive, and that's probably adaptive and a good thing.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. Maybe seeking a mate. I don't know. There are other
Who's
things.
fast asleep, by the way.
Right. Yeah. And then, or, preparing a nest or whatever it is.
That is so interesting because it's across all animals.
Yeah.
I'm very surprised by that. So,
Even flies.
Really?
Yes.
Whoa, man, I don't have a hypothesis for that one. So
Male flies take more naps.
Really?
Yeah.
If they're already
Sleep
getting
more.
more consistent sleep, why would they take more naps?
Well, so yeah, I don't. It probably has something to do with the reproductive cycle and all the other things a female's body has to do in order to prepare the
And
next
she needs
generation.
to be awake for that?
Or, it's not like female flies don't sleep. They
Yeah,
sleep,
yeah.
but there's other things that are going on also demanding their.
I've seen
attention.
some of your the talks that you give where you show people the different slides and this is where they're at and this part of their hormone cycle, and it seems like there's only one part where they just diverge all of a sudden quite dramatically.
Yeah.
What is that part of the cycle?
Yeah.
And
Why?
what's happening?
We don't know. We don't know why.
So
There's a lot of people doing hormones and sex differences and other people doing sleep, and the two fields haven't come together nearly as much as they need to. So, so during that one hormonal phase in rats, which, there's an equivalent in humans as well, that's when our progesterone and estrogen levels are very high. And that's when we're getting the least amount of sleep. That's when in women we complain of the most insomnia. But when they do sleep, their sleep is super efficient and really high quality. So that's when those spindles are aligning themselves across different areas of the brain. That's when our slow waves, which are cleaning our brain, are even bigger in that high hormonal amplitude stage of our cycles. So yes, we're getting less of it, but it's more efficient, which it might be another reason why different people need different amounts of sleep is maybe some people's sleep is more efficient and doing the job faster than other people's. We don't know.
It's very intriguing. Is there any research on a recent mother and how much sleep she gets? Like, does she sleep more lightly? Because I know there are different phases of your sleep. If you try to wake somebody up, they won't wake up.
Yeah.
Like I know in REM, they'll incorporate noises.
Yeah.
I've heard you say that kids will actually sleep through fire alarms.
Yeah.
Like loud fire
Yeah.
alarms.
Yeah.
What do we know about that and sex differences? Is there anything there?
Yeah, not much, especially when you're talking about new mothers. Woefully small amounts of data. There's a lot of things that we don't know. For example, the cerebellum, which is beneath our thalamus, it's so we don't have that thalamic gate of consciousness in our cerebellum. It learns. It's a really strong learning machine, and it might be able to help us wake up even with small noises that are relevant to our survival or our offspring's survival. So that might be why some people, most people, parents, are lighter sleepers because their cerebellum is attuned to the noises that their baby is making. And that's good. That's adaptive, right? You want that.
Not waking up when the fire alarm goes off, though, is
Right.
not super adaptive.
No,
what's happening
that's
there?
children. Adults will, and so
But
again,
isn't that super dangerous for a
Well,
kid? Like from an evolutionary standpoint, you're out in the
yeah.
Serengeti. You're not chilling in a house.
kids are very helpless in many, many ways, right? So it is our job as parents to be the ones to wake them up and carry them out of the burning house, right? Yeah, but they have
nature's just like, all right, you can stay knocked out. I'm going to do the things I need to do. I know your parents are going to snatch you up.
Yeah,
We're all good.
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is that preserved across species that young
The
ones are
species
way
you-
harder to wake up?
Yeah, the ones that social species.
Interesting.
Like rats, for example, too. Yeah, it's the same
So it
thing.
really might be tied to, that somebody else is going to be looking out for you when you're in infancy.
Yeah, and
Wow.
it's not so much a confidence thing as there are some really important things going on, essential things that are going on in your brain when you're developing. So
it's worth rolling the dice.
it's worth it. You kind of have to in order for your brain to be continuing to develop and incorporating all the differences in the world. We're born into such different environments. Some of us are born with a silver spoon in our mouths. Some of us are born super poor on the dirt and have to walk miles to get water. So we really need to be able to adapt to the environment in which we're born and the bodies which we're born with. So, some people are born without limbs. You really don't want to dedicate whole big portions of your brains to a limb that doesn't exist, right? Instead, you want to repurpose it for something else. During development, we are incorporating the world that is actually around us into our brain and maximizing its efficiency. So that happens through sleep. I just talked about, how we restructure our schema through sleep, and that's happening in spades when we're developing.
Very intriguing. So going back to women and how different things are for them, talk to me about PTSD and the locus ceruleus.
Yeah. Blue spot. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know when things go wrong with that spot, you can have all kinds of problems, but I also know that estrogen is protective against it. But I also know that women suffer from stress and anxiety more than men. So explain the blue spot, and then help us understand estrogen's role in all of this.
Yeah. So the blue spot is in our brainstem, and it is one of the first relay places for all incoming sensory and stimulation. So it'll wake us up. It'll switch our attention from this conversation to, if somebody's listening or watching this and something goes on in their house, they're going to switch their attention away from what we're talking about to whatever it is. And that's really good, and it's adaptive because we need to be able to switch our attention.
Otherwise, you're in trouble.
Yeah, otherwise we're in trouble. That's the locus ceruleus. It helps us to be alert and aroused and reorienting as we need to. It also, as it's tonically firing, helping us to learn from whatever we are engaged in. So this conversation, hopefully both of our locus ceruleus is going, and we're able to follow the conversation really well. But when it switches to a phasic, sharp, that's when we need to switch our attention. But right now, it's tonically happening. So it's responsive to stressors, and what it does is it helps us to learn quickly from that stressor, because what it provides to the brain, all over the brain, is norepinephrine, which helps us to learn quickly and strengthen synapses. It's only when it's not present that we can actually weaken those synapses after we've consolidated what we've learned and changed our schema. Once that's done, you can erase those novel memories from the novelty encoding structures in our proximal dendritic tree. And so we really need norepinephrine to be absent in order to be able to do that synaptic weakening. It can't happen when norepinephrine is present, when that blue spot is firing. So the only time when the blue spot stops firing is during rapid eye movement sleep. But that's something that we've known for, since the 80s maybe. And but we've only ever studied it in males. So we know that that's kind of dogma. The locus ceruleus stops firing in REM sleep. Therefore, REM sleep is able to allow us to reformulate our schema and erase those things that aren't necessary.
And we can strip the emotional intensity off of a memory.
That's right. So, for example, if we're learning something that's emotionally really relevant to us, and those emotions help us to learn those things, our locus ceruleus is firing, helping us to learn that emotional memory. It's during sleep that we can consolidate all the facts to the rest of our brain, to those distal dendrites, and then during REM sleep, when we can erase the novelty of it, the salience of it, so that it's not something that just happened to us that day. It's something that we've consolidated, and now we can erase from the novelty encoding circuitry so we can encode something new. But it's with the lack of locus ceruleus activity, the lack of activity in the blue spot in REM sleep, that we can do that. And just recently, my lab has started to record from the locus ceruleus in females, and we find across the estrus cycle, the locus ceruleus doesn't completely stop firing during REM sleep in some phases of the cycle, in the low hormonal phases of the cycle, which would really not allow you to refresh your brain quite as well as you would otherwise. And I don't know what the physiological importance of that is, but given that that's the case, that also might be why women are 2 to 4 times more susceptible to post-traumatic stress disorder, because post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder not of forgetting. I mean, that's too overly simplistic. It's a disorder of not being able to relegate the past to the past. It's where these emotional traumatic memories stay in the present as though they just happened that same day. And yes, we're able to consolidate it, but then we're not able to do the second step, which is to erase it from this novelty encoding circuitry to allow us to learn new things after that. Instead, it hangs on to that traumatic memory and all the aspects of it, the emotionality and the way it makes our heart beat fast and our skin sweat and all of that, as though it just happened that same day. So if your locus coeruleus is not stopping firing during REM sleep at certain phases of our hormonal cycle, then REM sleep can't do what it's supposed to do, which is to refresh that novelty encoding circuit. That's our hypothesis, and that's what we're working
REM
with right
is
now.
a trip. Very interesting. Okay, so
If your mission is achieving excellence, you must support your body. Introducing AG1. This powerhouse blend is packed with 75 premium vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients that elevate your immune system, uplift your mood, and promote restful sleep. AG1 is offering a great deal for our listeners. 1 year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Don't miss this opportunity to optimize your health and truly be legendary.
in PTSD, my stress levels remain elevated. So I'm doing the this isn't important, this is important thing in sleep, but I actually can't get to the this isn't important because my stress levels are still so high, which is telling my body, no, this remains salient. And so it becomes a generalized salience. Like, do you end up overwhelming your short-term memory? Like if you're constantly just saying like, everything's important, you can't strip anything away. Does that have long-term, like, has anybody looked at PTSD and victims and how they have trouble learning new things?
Yeah. So one of the things you can't learn, for example, is the context of safety,
Woof.
So yeah, that's not good. And in animals, they don't learn any kind of reversal based learning. What I mean by reversal learning is that was then, this is now, now my home is moved, now the place where my food used to be is moved. All of that is reversal learning. We call it reversal just because it's not necessarily unlearning, because you might still remember where your food used to be, but it's reweighting, I guess.
Recontextualizing. An example I've heard you use a lot, which makes a lot of sense, especially for people our age, is that you hear the sound of a helicopter, you're in war, that's bad sound, danger. But when you go back home, it could just be a news helicopter. And so you have to recontextualize the same sound.
Yes. And not have the same panic response, which is perfectly adaptive in the theater of war, but at home you don't want to be diving under the table every time a helicopter comes by.
Okay, so that makes the prediction that anything that quiets that down should allow me to lessen, hopefully eradicate PTSD. So beta blockers is something I've heard you talk about. Have we looked at how effective those are at
There have been, as far as I know, 8 clinical studies, and I think there's another one going on right now.
What do beta blockers do?
So beta blockers block the receptors of noradrenaline, which is the neurotransmitter produced by the locus coeruleus, that blue spot, which helps us to learn. But whenever those beta receptors are occupied by norepinephrine, that only allows us to formulate new memories and strengthen new memories, and doesn't allow us to weaken others. So beta blockers block that receptor, so noradrenaline can't occupy it, and then make the neuron think that there's no norepinephrine here. There's nothing important, there's nothing stressful, we don't need to learn anything new. And I think the reason why many of those clinical trials failed is because they didn't quite understand that you do need the beta adrenergic receptor occupied by norepinephrine when you are learning something new, like the context of safety. But it's during sleep that you need the beta receptors to be not occupied by norepinephrine anymore, so that you can do the loosening that's required for reassociating and recontextualizing something. So
That's very interesting.
so you need to give them at the right time, I think, and enough. You also, other clinical trials, I think, failed because they gave too low of a dose and it didn't occupy enough or didn't block enough of the beta receptors in the brain.
And have you looked at the research on psychedelics and trauma therapy?
I have. It's really fascinating. And the thing about psychedelics, many of them actually activate the serotonergic system. And we don't even know which specific receptors. Serotonin is another, noradrenaline is one neurotransmitter system. Serotonin is a different one that is also on whenever we're learning. So the serotonergic system comes from all over the brain. It comes over from the dorsal raphe nucleus in the brainstem. And that's another nucleus that shuts off during REM sleep. So the noradrenergic system and the serotonergic system are normally off during REM sleep. So psychedelics don't reproduce REM sleep because they're agonists of serotonin. However, there are at least 15, maybe 21 different receptors for serotonin, and each of them do a different thing in a different neuronal subtype in a different compartment of the neuron. And so in my model of the way things work, the serotonergic receptors out there at the distal dendrites where our cortex is talking to each other, those are the ones that actually help dampen the effect of that on our response to the world outside. So what they do when you occupy the serotonergic receptors is they shunt out information coming in from the familiarity encoding cortical schema, and don't allow that to dominate us anymore. And instead, it weights everything toward what's going on right now, here and now. So again, there's lots of different receptors, but for that one, in any case, that's really important, I think, to be absent in REM sleep, because that's when you want to be building those schema about the outside world. If you don't have enough serotonin in your system, then you perhaps are always, too attuned to what's going on out there in the distal dendrites, and not enough attuned to what's coming in from the outside and learning new things. Depression, antidepressants are serotonergic agonists. It may help us to be more attuned to the world around us as we're awake and walking around it. But I would also suggest that maybe antidepressants should be stopped when we want to go to sleep, because we need serotonin to be off in order to rebalance our system at night. So,
do SSRIs disrupt sleep?
They do. They really do. They actually block REM sleep pretty effectively, depending on when you take it and how much you take it. But also, those studies haven't been done in people who are trying to learn something new. So we don't know if it's 100% blocking REM sleep when someone is studying for an exam, for example. Maybe that homeostatic need for sleep overcomes the SSRI's blockage of REM sleep, and you get beautiful REM just when you need it. Yeah.
That's really interesting. So when you get people on different medications, the amount, most people are going to be taking it chronically. So this is a reason that I'm very hesitant to take supplements. When you start isolating things, the number of knock-on effects that you can have is pretty crazy. But I've heard you talk about the importance of, if you've just suffered something traumatic, you need to understand this, what you can do to block the encoding of that traumatic event. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's like, hey, if you can talk yourself down and get into a calm place before you go to bed, great. If you can't, even getting drunk might be better than just going to sleep.
Yeah.
Why would that be true?
Yeah. We do want to learn from our traumatic experiences, right? We don't want to not learn what's dangerous out there, for example. But we don't want to hang on to that novelty of that memory for the rest of our lives. We want to put it where it goes and then leave it, right? And access it when we need it the next time. But other than that, it's lying dormant and sitting there ready when you need it. You don't want it to be there, present and part of your life every single day and influencing every decision you make.
Is that first night's sleep an important window for
Yeah.
avoiding that?
Yeah, the first couple of nights sleep, it takes about a week to consolidate a memory and put it
Whoa.
away. Yeah, but that first couple of nights is when you actually are hanging on to the memory until it's consolidated. You don't want to erase it until it's really fully consolidated, fully entrenched in everything that you know, and in the way that it should be entrenched. And then after that, once it's consolidated, you want sleep to be able to reverse the weight of that salience. So what happens in the first couple of nights, when you've learned something really mind-blowingly new, is you are consolidating it, and you hang on to it until that whole process is done, and then you start erasing it from that novelty encoding circuitry. But in order to consolidate it and put it where it needs to go, you need to rearrange the schema that are already there, right? So if you want, for example, to remember the specific context of something that's scary and fearful, instead of just generalizing it, if you want to learn the specific context, you want to put those memories where they go, and that involves some weakening of some of the memories in that schema already in order to put the pieces of information where they go. And you also need your novelty encoding proximal dendrites to be ready for those new pieces of information and all the refinements of them. If that is already saturated with something, then you can't learn anything but the simple in-out relationship. Sound, scary, run, right? That's the simple ones. So if you want to learn all of the pieces of the information, the context in which something scary happened, you need your brain to be refreshed by the sleep the night before and able to encode all the pieces of information, and then able to write it out to the long-term memory structure, and then able to refresh that novelty encoding circuitry again, so the next day you can refine that with even more information, more context. As you think about the trauma that happened, you can even contextualize it more. You can talk it through with your friends and family. They can help you realize that was then, this is now, this is why this happened. You'll be able to learn these new things and these new pieces of context because your sleep that first night was a healthy sleep. So that's why you really need that sleep to be norepinephrine free, because you can both write the new pieces of information into the context through those sleep spindles, and erase that novelty encoding context from the novelty encoding structures, so that you can again recontextualize and relearn the next day. And then after a few days of that, a few nights of that, you'll have done the job of writing out all those pieces of information. Your memory will be good, your schema will be good, and you can just completely erase that from your novelty encoding structure so that you can turn your attention to something new. So when you said it's better to even get drunk or stay up all night, if your sleep doesn't lack that norepinephrine and serotonin, then that first night, then instead of you might be able to consolidate it, but you're gonna saturate your system with that traumatic memory and create a positive feedback loop that just continues to re-entrench it as though it happened the same day every day.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that. So everything that you went through assumes everything is working well. So get your sleep, make sure that you don't have dysregulated stress response just in general. But as somebody I went through a period in my life where my anxiety was off the charts. Now it ended up being, I'll call it 70% diet. And so I no longer have generalized anxiety disorder.
Right.
But I know what it feels like to have a very disproportionate response to something and just be like, I don't understand what is going on. So if somebody were in a car accident, let's say, very traumatic moment, I know that historically people thought, well, you need to talk to somebody about it. Then the studies show that's actually terrible, and you're just reinforcing it.
Right.
So one, I'd love to hear what we know about how talk therapy over a traumatic event can actually just reinforce it.
Right.
And then if we had somebody that has a disproportionate response and they're amplitude of stress does not match what happened,
Yeah.
what kind of protocol, if we had an infinite pharmacy, or maybe that isn't the right answer, but we have access to anything, like they're going to perfect compliance. If we need drugs, we have drugs. Like, what would that protocol look like?
Yeah. So unless that talk therapy is teaching you something about how to contextualize that, it's actually really good to speak to a loved one after a traumatic event.
If they're helping you de-stress?
If they're helping you de-stress and contextualize. So one of the things that shuts the locus coeruleus off fastest after a traumatic event is being able to learn from it. So, if you had a car accident and someone can say, well, yeah, but you ran the red light. And you say, oh, you're right. I was texting. I ran the red light. Next time, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to text while driving. And
it was a drunk driver, and I was just sitting at the red light.
If you're just sitting at the red light and there's a drunk driver, there's not much you can learn from it. So
now stress level through the roof.
Yeah.
Life's unpredictable. Oh my God, I'm never going to leave my house again.
Your locus coeruleus will not stop firing if there's nothing to be learned from it. It's still searching for, what can I learn from that? What can I learn from that? So the way that I, de-stress after such a random haphazard event is to take what I have a worldview where I believe that everything ultimately will work out for the best. Even if right now it looks terrible, it will work out for the best. And that helps me to de-stress because I know, it's horrible now. But with a long view, I'm going to, all these troubles are going to be over.
That's very interesting.
And so that can help me calm down. And talking to my mother always helped me with that because
why?
She had the wisdom of the years, right?
Of like, you're gonna get better from this.
You're gonna get better.
There's
you're gonna survive.
Positive.
It's gonna, you may be really in the future. You're gonna be a transportation minister, and you're gonna be able to make lights safer or reduce the amount of drunk driving because you're gonna help, with psychiatry. So
that is really profound. Yeah. So I am a growth mindset junkie. And I've never understood that there was even like an actual brain mechanism happening behind the scenes. But like you and I have, I think, very different worldviews, but they probably serve the same function. I literally just took a note, prayer, because I know that you pray and you've often referred to that as being something that you use to lower your stress. That's really interesting when I think about how something like prayer could serve such a profound function to last from, for thousands of years, probably more. That's very interesting.
Giving you a universal worldview that takes you out of the immediacy of this moment.
And tells you something good will come from this.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn something, I'm going to get something, feels like a really interesting trigger. What I find so fascinating about it, though, it's just a thought. But that thought, somehow that context registers at a very deep limbic level.
That's right. It does. Our locus coeruleus is connected. It gets all kinds of inputs from our prefrontal cortex, from our hippocampus, from our learning and memory systems, from our emotional systems. And it feeds back onto our locus coeruleus and says, okay, it's okay now. And our locus coeruleus says, okay, it's all right. I'll stop barking. I'll stop alerting you. It's going to be all right.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. I love understanding the mechanisms to things when they're, I guess, is a known one. Okay, very interesting. So you have a worldview. You just had this car accident. Even though it was a drunk driver, your worldview kicks in. You feel like it's going to work out for the better. What else would we throw in our protocol?
Right. So if that's not enough.
Because that really might be enough? Whatever, you just need to quiet the locus coeruleus.
Right.
Got it.
Sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes you have forgotten to go back to your worldview or pray, or you don't have people around you to remind you that, it's going to work out. Well, again, like we were just saying, it's something inside your own brain that you can teach yourself. So you can calm yourself down. Your mind can keep you well.
Your mind can keep you well.
Well,
that's nice.
Yeah,
your mind can also make you sick.
Yes, exactly.
The terrifying flip side of that coin.
Right. Yeah, I didn't make up that catchphrase. That was the title of a TV show, or not TV. It was an NPR show when I was a child. My
Wow.
mother used to listen to it all the time.
I love it.
Yeah, yeah.
Your mind can keep you well. I like that.
Yeah. But if all these things fail, then I would, stay up. If you have insomnia and because you can't figure this out and you are stressed, be awake. Be awake until you can find your way out of it. And so for some people, maybe it's doing something super relaxing to get their mind off of it, like you were listening to podcast, a story. Get your mind off of this immediate thing. Listen to a nice story, watch a nice movie, read a nice book, or listen to, get a storyteller to tell you a good story, a bedtime story that takes your mind off of this horrible thing that just happened. Allow your whole system to relax and then have a very good night's sleep. Most sleep is adaptive. Most people don't get PTSD from a traumatic event. And that's because our sleep is most of the time doing what it's supposed to do. But if you are, for some reason you sleep deprived from the night before and you're super sleepy, even though you're wired, you can go to sleep. That's not good. Don't go to sleep wired. I guess that's the thing I'm trying to say. Don't go to sleep wired. Do something to calm yourself down so that your locus coeruleus can quiet and do what it's supposed to do during sleep.
Do you meditate?
I have tried. For me, it's prayer. But
I was going to say prayer is so meditative.
It is. It's meditative.
So this may be too private. By all means,
No,
say nothing. But how do you pray?
Yeah.
Are you asking for something for yourself, for others, for protection, love?
Yeah, I mean, just knowing that there is an all-powerful being who cares about me really helps. And then secondly, prayer is also being thankful. So meditating, I guess, on all the things you're thankful for and you're grateful for. So prayer reminds me of all the good in my life and the good in the people around me. And then also praying for people and for things helps me to not feel as helpless. I don't feel helpless because I'm doing something, right? I'm asking God who's all powerful, to intervene and to change things. And that very much helps me feel like I've done something. It helps, some people, they like to write lists. That also helps me, but that's a way to put the list in God's hands.
It's interesting. So I'm not religious, but I have been in situations before where something feels so out of my control. I am desperate to appeal to a higher power. Yeah. I get it.
Go for it.
Yeah, it's really
even if you don't believe it, do it.
Yeah, it makes you feel like, I still have a thing I can do. I totally get that. Yeah. Has anybody looked at prayer and loneliness? So I used to be religious, and I remember that feeling of like I'm talking to somebody who's listening, and they're powerful and loving.
Yeah.
It's a very nice feeling.
Yeah, it is. I think there was a moment in my life when I was the loneliest ever, and I was crying, and I just felt completely spun out of control. And I heard this voice in my head that just said, "Why are you crying? I'm with you." And it kind of arrested my tears. I went, "Oh yeah." That was the only time I've ever heard God. But it was like, "Why? I'm here with you." And I'm like, "Oh yeah." I'm not alone. I'm not alone. I'm never alone.
So interesting. Yeah, that's one of those things, man. So I have a thought that runs through my head frequently, and longtime listeners of the show will have heard me say it many times, but there is a God-shaped hole in all of us. You need to fill it with something. So, all right, I'm really starting to formulate a very useful understanding of how I can leverage sleep to, whether it's strip the emotional resonance off of something, whether it's free up my short-term memory so I can learn new things, the consolidation, the removing of the narrative from the dots and snapping back to just dots so I can update my schema. That's really going to stick with me.
I love the way you said that. It's really nice.
Thank you.
It's going to stick with me too.
Nice. May it be useful.
Yeah.
How do I supercharge learning? So I am a big believer that we can all 100x our abilities, but it doesn't happen by accident. And so I'm always looking for an edge on how I can learn something better.
Yeah.
Like, is it naps? Is it just meditating before I go to bed? Like, how do we really make sure we remember what we learned?
Yeah. That's a good question. And we don't really know how we tag the things that we want to remember and how we tag the things that we want to forget. There's a lot of automaticity to it that must be pretty good. I think your brain is probably already optimized to learn great.
I really hope that's not true. If this is optimized, we are all in trouble. I just throw a lot of time at it. That's my only solution, which I really want to shorten that time.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so here's one shortcut, but I don't think it's good in the long run. It's not good in the long run, though. Yeah, it's probably good for cramming in one piece of information, but
okay, we'll take it.
Right. One study done in the 90s, I believe it was, that while the person was learning something kind of mind blowing, they had a clock ticking in the background. It was a very loud clock, and then when they were in REM sleep, the experimenter made that clock go back on again. And so it did reactivate a lot of the pathways that we're learning. But what we don't know yet is what the locus coeruleus is doing. Is that just, again, reinforcing that one thing you learned and preventing it from being, from disconnecting and becoming dots and making it creative? There was no creativity part of that study.
Oh, yeah, that stuff is so complicated.
Yeah, so we still need to look at creativity and insight. Whether those people 20% better on that one thing that they were learning, but they didn't test whether or not they could extract that and apply it to other situations. But 20% better, that's a C to an A, right? If you're talking about a test. But you might also not be able to do the erasure parts that you need to do. You might be sacrificing other parts of other things that you learned the day before that, for example, and that you need to schematize instead of learn via just rote.
Man, I hope somebody does some research on that, because so my brain already starts worrying. So, all right, let's say that each day I was going to pick one thing and I was going to study it for, let's say, 20 minutes. And then I'm going to replay the clock ticking for 5 minutes during my REM cycle, which let's say is tied to my Fitbit or whatever.
Right.
And so I know when I'm actually in REM.
Yeah.
It triggers, but it only triggers for a brief period, so that theoretically I can still do all the other things.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting.
I would just do it that one night and just for 5 minutes.
I
don't do it night after night. You're gonna screw everything up and saturate your brain with that one thing.
Yeah, that sounds about right. You end up getting some advantage in one area, but you end up sacrificing everything else.
Yeah.
Because you are competing against evolution.
Yeah.
Evolution's had a lot of time to figure things out. But we were talking about this right before we started rolling camera. There's a really interesting meme about, here's what the Olympics looked like in 1921. Here's what they look like in 1921 or 2021. And it is hilarious how much more advanced we are now. So obviously, as you pointed out, it's not our biology. Our biology hasn't changed.
Yeah.
But the cultural element that stacks, we've more belief because we've seen what's possible.
Yeah.
Better equipment, better training.
Right. We know what our bodies can do. We can push it harder knowing that we're not going to rupture anything. Or if we do, at least there'll be good physicians on hand to help us heal.
Yeah. Man, it's so interesting. Learning really is a superpower, and memory is the thing that I've struggled with most profoundly in my life. So, and I'm always looking for things that can help with that.
Yeah.
Are there, you might hate this question, but are there drugs that help with memory?
Yeah, there's even one called memantine.
Memantine?
Yeah, for memory, right?
Interesting. How have I never heard of this?
Yeah, it's got side effects.
What's the on-label use case?
So I believe it's for dementia. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And it works?
Somewhat. Again, nobody studied these things in relation to sleep. So for what it does is it boosts acetylcholine by blocking the receptors that reuptake it. Acetylcholine is really important for neuroplasticity.
Isn't that what makes you feel tired?
adrenaline. I mean, that's adenosine.
Adenosine.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
all right. Acetylcholine, ACH is the
Yeah,
way
I'm
we...
trying to cram the
that's all
things
right.
into the little bit that
They
I
both start with
understand
A,
here.
you're right. So acetylcholine, you need it when you're attending to something. It's pumping great and giving us great rhythms for learning when we're exercising. So walking and learning is a great thing to do, or running and learning is a great thing to do. It's also really present in our brains when we're in rapid eye movements.
You're more likely to remember something that you learned while walking or running?
Yeah, or incorporate
Interesting.
it. Yeah.
Because of the neurochemistry.
Yeah, because of the rhythms of our brain.
The rhythm or the...
And the chemistry. The chemistry sets up the rhythm. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Wow, I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
I have experienced that you can get insights while walking, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
But I did not know that you're more likely to remember something.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually sitting at our desk trying to learn something is probably not the best way to learn things.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Is there an evolutionary reason for that? Just that we would have always been moving? I don't know.
think so. I think it's probably that's probably what it is. Yeah. I don't know otherwise, but we can create, for example, cats watching a bird fly around has a ton of that acetylcholine. Actually, whenever we attend to something, acetylcholine gets ramped up in that area of the brain we're using for that purpose. So, and then again, during REM sleep, we have a ton of acetylcholine in those areas of the brain that are trying to learn. During slow wave sleep, when we're cleaning our brains, acetylcholine is gone. It's completely gone. So we need it to be absent when we're doing the cleaning process.
Very interesting. Okay, I'm going to try to talk through something.
The side effects are...
Oh, please, yeah.
Acetylcholine is what every single one of our muscles uses. Our gut uses it. And so a lot of acetylcholine will screw us up, screw up our guts, make us feel awful in lots of ways. So...
Does not sound like a good trade.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything that makes me feel sick, like even eating a meal too late, which is actually something we didn't talk about when you talk about sleep hygiene.
Yeah.
For me, even stopping eating 3 hours before I go to bed, I will feel the difference. So I stop eating 7 hours before I go to bed.
Wow.
And it feels awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
And I used to eat like literally chew, swallow, sleep.
Yeah.
And when I stopped doing that, I was like, whoa, this really makes a huge difference.
That's great.
And I remember when my wife had massive digestive issues, and she kept saying, I really think it matters, like how much before I go to sleep that I stop eating.
Yeah.
And I was like, why? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
100% definitely not it. She's like, no, I really think it is. And I'm going to start stopping earlier and earlier.
Yeah.
And she settled on about 3 hours. And then when I started doing intermittent fasting, just for other reasons, had nothing to do with how I was sleeping, I found that it improved my sleep.
Yeah, that's
which
great.
is very, very interesting.
Yeah, it is. Actually, there was just a study out about what eating a high protein meal will do. It changes the way your gut, what a hormone your gut secretes that then that hormone travels to your brain and helps you sleep better.
Protein.
So,
I've heard that carbohydrates help you sleep better, but I've never heard it about protein.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of research that needs to be done yet. This was in flies and mice. And then baby mice and baby humans sleep better if their tummy is full. So,
but not adults.
Not adults.
That's
well,
unexpected.
actually, I'm trying to think of what studies have done with adults and being full and sleep. But I know if you're working your digestive system, that's not a good thing while you're sleeping. But again, I think more studies need to be done to iron these things out. Why does it work in babies? Why is it different in adults? We don't know. Yeah.
It's very interesting. You can understand why babies would need food in terms of just the rapid growth, especially now because they've got tons of body fat, but I would imagine they're not accessing the body fat and they're eating a high sugar diet for sure while they're breastfeeding.
It's more readily available energy,
but sort of quick to go through the system. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, there can't be enough studies on diet. But it is a very difficult thing to do unless you can literally imprison people and only give them the
Yeah.
food that you want them to eat, because the compliance is so low.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
All right, there's a complex idea that I want to try to talk through. Nudge me if I go too far afield here. But when you were talking, you made me realize that there are concepts that are pre-embedded in the brain. And one of the things that I find really important, so I'm obsessed with what I was talking about earlier. The brain is a prediction engine. Whatever it is, whatever cool thing you're trying to do with your life, you really are trying to update your schema so that you get closer to ground truth, and you're better able to do only the things that are going to be effective. And as a species, what makes humans interesting, and you made sort of an oblique reference to this earlier, is that we don't come pre-hardwired with everything. We don't adapt to a limb that we don't have. We are doing things based on the actual environment that we're in. We could have been born into a lot of environments, but we're actually in this one. And so making sure that we're adapting to that. So, all right, humans are the most adaptive of all the animals, which is exactly how we've become the most dominant apex predator the world has ever seen. But at the same time, we're not blank slates.
Yeah.
So there are ideas that are embedded in the brain, and I can't remember what you were saying, but the note I took was right or false and true are categories of things that are innate, and that our brain, when we sleep, is tagging things. This is true. This is false. And I just thought, whoa, that has real implications in terms of, as we all, social media is sort of deranging this, where we're losing a hold of, and I don't mean it like in a political way, but if true and false are a category that the brain is looking for to tag something, this is effective part of the schema, this is ineffective part of the schema, and adjust accordingly.
Right.
If you're reinterpreting the world based on true and false, you better be right. And so then it becomes a question of, what are we using to tag things as true and false? And this is where, as somebody who teaches entrepreneurship, I'm always trying to get people to understand, if you don't have the right metric by which you judge the success or failure of a test, you're going to be in trouble. How close am I with that like category thing that the brain is doing?
Yeah, I think you're very close. I have a good friend, someone I used to work with, whose world schema was built by his parents and his community. And but then he went to business school, and he learned all kinds of new things that weren't quite fitting with that schema. For example, what he was told was good for him. He saw how the business world was just taking advantage of it and using it to profit, and not necessarily working out for his best interests, but for the bottom line best interest of the business. And then one day, with one experience, his whole schema changed, and he's no longer. He realized that all that schema was wrong. I mean, there was just huge holes in it. It didn't align anymore, and he saw how they could align. And then he realized that he couldn't just trust his parents anymore. He was an adult at that time, and he couldn't just trust his community around him. That there's a whole other world out there and forces at work that they didn't understand, and that he didn't understand until that moment. And so he had to shift his whole worldview and make a whole new schema. And so the way that we build the world is usually, first we have to trust our parents, our caregivers. We have to trust, and if they say something's important or something's scary, we trust them because that's part of survival. But there comes a point when we should start, weighing things for ourselves, and based on our experience and based on our own thoughts and based on what we've learned, so that we are building a schema that makes sense to us. And like you say, you better be right. But if we're wrong, we might be able to survive okay, but not optimally.
It's really interesting. So as you were saying that, it made me realize, okay, you've got the categories of true, false, but the entire worldview is going to influence
Absolutely.
the tagging of
yeah.
true and false.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So what are other categories that the brain comes pre-hardwired with? So it doesn't give you your worldview, but it does give you category of, you can determine this is useful, this is not useful, or
Right.
this is true, this is false. Have you thought about other categories that we come pre-hardwired with?
Sure. Well, we're pre-hardwired to learn who our parents are and to imprint on them so that we know who to trust and who to look for comfort and for food. And that is pre-hardwired. We have this area of our brain, or several areas of our brain, that are trained to look for the caregiver. And whether that caregiver is a good one or a bad one doesn't matter. We are hardwired to imprint on that person and to learn from them. It can be really difficult when we're older, to say, that parent or that caregiver that I imprinted on did a terrible job, and I don't want to be that, and I don't want to marry that. When I select a partner, it can be really difficult to fight against when we learn something new about the world and get a bigger and a different worldview. That's wrong. I don't want somebody to abuse me. I don't want to find a partner who's going to abuse me like I was abused when I was a child. And it's really hard because we've imprinted, our brain, and that critical period of imprinting has closed. So it becomes a really hard thing. It's not impossible. Absolutely, it is possible. But it takes a lot of effort and a lot of sleep.
What does that effort look like? How do you begin? Because childhood trauma really freaks me out because of how long it echoes through people's lives. And it seems for most people, either because they won't adhere to a treatment protocol, but it seems intractable.
Yeah. How is it intractable? We have plasticity, like you say. We are able to learn new things, but we need to be dedicated about it and surround ourselves, for example, by people who aren't going to abuse you anymore, and believe that that is the good thing. And we will always have that wiring, that original imprint wiring, but we can form new synapses and make those synapses strong and stronger than the original ones were. But if
What
we
does
ever...
that process look like?
It's actually synaptic remodeling. It's actually dendrites and axons reaching each other. Yeah, repetition, surrounding ourselves again by this new world that we want instead of the world that we had, and a dedication and attention to it every day, and sleeping on it every night. And it's a long, slow process, because during those critical periods, it happens quickly. It happens quickly because our brain said, okay, this is the time when we learn about who our parents are and what a caregiver looks like. And so once that critical period is closed, and I call it critical period, there is a particular time of our life.
What's the window?
Well, with caregivers, if we were chicks, baby chicks, it's at 17 hours after eclosure, after hatching.
That's brief.
So yeah, so for a couple of hours after that, if you don't happen to encounter your mother until hour 19 or 20, it's okay. You'll still, but if you encounter something at 17 hours, that's not your mother, like something that's making a sound and moving away from you, you're going to imprint on that thing. Wow. So it's a few hours. I'm sorry, for a few hours for a chick. For humans, of course, it's going to be longer, but we don't actually know what the exact critical period is yet. There's some studies that need to be done. Language learning is another thing that our brains are set to learn. If we are born deaf, we will still learn language. It won't be the oral language. We'll learn body language better. We'll learn to lip read. We'll learn sign language if it's given to us, or the signs that the body language if our caregiver is giving us. So our brain is set to learn, and there is a critical period to that too. If we are, for example, born into an English-speaking family and we try at age 35 to learn Chinese, and that's the first time, well, not the first time, but if during your critical language learning period in the first 6 months of life, if you've never heard Chinese and all the sounds of it, and it was never directed toward you, and you were never told a story in that language, you won't have saved the synaptic pathways that were open during that period of time. They
Interesting.
hear all the different
6
sounds.
months.
Yes, it's
Wow.
that young, before we're even babbling, or just at the beginning of babbling. Just listening to the sounds of these languages will change our brain and help us to preserve synapses that will allow us to always hear the sounds of that other language. So that later, when we try to actually pick it up ourselves, we'll still be able to hear it. And those people that were never exposed to it will have pruned those synapses away. During that
Okay,
period.
so really tight period for imprinting, for language. What are some of the other phases? And I will contextualize this. So this really matters to me. So impact theory, the reason this company is called Impact Theory is my theory on how to impact people at scale is through story. So I tried just telling people, think like this, act like this.
Yeah.
You can build your own company, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
2% of people would take that advice and do something with it. And it was extraordinary to witness. But I was just like, what about the 98% that are doing exactly nothing with this information? And how do we reach them?
Yeah.
And that's when I really started getting obsessed with worldview. So I'm going to assume you know nothing about my story. So my last company was in manufacturing. So we were in the inner cities. So I had big brothered for a kid that grew up in South Central as sort of a knock on of going to USC. And I watched him get consumed by his zip code. Flash forward 15 years later, I now have 1,000 employees that remind me of him. And I'm like, but I'm not a young kid anymore. I know what to do with this. And so realizing that the difference between the 2% and the 98%, the 2% had a growth mindset and they were willing to try things and deploy it. But I had one guy in the 2% get in a fist fight with his friends because they were like, you changed because you've started reading.
Yeah.
And I was like, you got in a fist fight because you read now? He's like, yes. And I was like, oh my God, like this does not make any sense. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to give up on adults and I'm going to focus on kids and I'm going to catch them at what I think of as the age of imprinting, 11 to 15. You're not imprinting on your parents. You're now imprinting from culture. That I can influence. I can't influence who your parents are, but I can influence what your friends think is cool. And so the whole idea of impact theory is to tell stories, make video games, yada, yada, that have actual, real, useful ideas at the core. So the way that we sum it up is if in one of our stories, a mentor gives the character advice, you as the viewer can take that advice because it's real. And so I want to know that age of imprinting, the 11 to 15 rough swag, is actually a moment where I can influence people because Disney takes a younger approach. And so they're going after like that 6 to 11, like really get them young. It's just as a person, that's not a form of entertainment that I find as interesting.
Right,
So I'm really hopeful that there's something still, going on here.
And we are still learning.
In terms of what's possible.
Yeah, our brains are definitely still developing at age 11 to 15.
Not we as researchers.
Yeah.
11 to 15, we are still learning.
Yeah, definitely. And social learning is a big, big thing at that time. So it's great to surround yourself by people who like to read, for example, at that age, because even if you came from a family which didn't do a lot of reading, you can have that influence you because it's your peers and people you respect and like and admire who are doing this behavior that you can then engage in. So absolutely is possible. The school system, the reason why preschool is actually a really good age is because, again, that language learning, if you have someone reading to you when you're a baby and, age 1, 2, 3, looking at you, telling you you're a good person, that's also a really big critical period for language learning, vocabulary learning. It's not the end, but it is a critical period.
Do you know Jeffrey Canada?
No.
Oh, man, I want this guy on the show so bad. So he's one of the early charter school people. So grows up in Harlem, says, I'm going to fix the education system. Gets a full ride scholarship to Harvard, goes into education, spends, I think, a decade trying to fix it from the inside, realizes never going to fix this from the inside, starts these schools on the outside, but largely based on a key insight, which is he asked, why do middle income kids do well and lower income kids do poorly? And he realized it's the number of words you hear by the age of 3
Yep.
and the ratio of positive to negative. And I was like, what? And he said in a middle income household, you hear roughly, I think it's 5 million words, and the ratio of positive to negative is 70% positive, 30% negative. In the inner cities, it's either 3 million or 2 million. I can't remember, but it's dramatically less.
Yeah.
And the ratio is flipped. It's 30% positive, 70% negative.
Yeah.
And he said, what that does to the language centers of your brain is so startling.
Yeah.
And so he went on this crusade to get people who are about to become mothers. He didn't wait till they actually
Right.
had kids. If you were about to become a mother, he wanted you to start reading to your baby in utero and to keep
Get used to
reading.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once they were born. And I was like, whoa, that's one of those insights about the brain. That shit scares me.
Yeah.
It scares me. It has become not that age, but that idea has
Yeah.
become the central mission of my life.
Yeah.
If you can intercept people at the right time with the right idea in the right format,
Yeah.
you will change how their brain develops.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. How they see the world. The entire schema. At those early ages, we're forming our schema of the world, how the world works. It's really good to intervene early if you want someone not to be screwed up and to work better in this society. Yeah.
No doubt.
But it's incredible. I mean, this guy is probably one of the examples. There are lots of people who are surrounded by horrible situations as they grow up, and they're able to, latch onto the one role model that's different and that's better, and they're able to not reproduce that same bad situation in their own life when they're adults. And it's a very inspiring story. But we actually really do, even those people who say, I did it all by myself, there's always somebody or some influence somewhere that helped them.
For sure. For sure. All right. What do you, as you look at the research being done around sleep, being done around the brain in general, where do you think this goes? So you've already planted a flag on mitochondria, the energy system.
Yeah.
I love a good hypothesis. I completely understand. You have no idea where this will all lead, and you're super open to being
Yeah.
wrong. As a scientist, I'm sure that just guides all of your thinking.
Yeah.
But what are some interesting areas that either you want to see studied or that you see some early
Yeah.
research coming out that could be very meaningful?
Yeah, well, there are lots of fields. Drug addiction, that's a powerful remodeler of the brain.
That drugs
Drugs
negatively
do,
and
yeah.
positively, or only negatively?
Well, it's positive in terms of drug-seeking behaviors, right? It rewires
Would we
the
call that
entire
positive?
brain toward, if you're a drug, hey, yeah,
Well said.
but it's a powerful rewiring of your brain that I would like to see good ways to use sleep to rewire back, to learn through sleep and restore the processes that happen during sleep so that we can be open to relearning the good way again and not to be so stressed. So drug addiction is one area. PTSD is another, something I'm really passionate about. I've got some family members who have PTSD and lost a family member through PTSD. So that's, again, another way that stress powerfully remodels the brain for the worse. And I would like to figure out a way to make it so that sleep helps us be adaptive. Sleep helps us to adapt. And
do you see a path? Because is it just, we just need to, read a good book, play a calming video game, meditate, whatever, and then you're going to be fine? Or do you see, is AI going to play a role? Some of the brain feedback that people are getting?
I think biofeedback is going to help. People
How?
are very unaware of their own stress levels, for example, and how they're processing things. If we're able to tell them through a wearable that, hey, it looks like you are stressed right now, you should probably do some relaxation exercises before you go to bed. And then, there's also a really interesting study where they cued people to learn something before they went to sleep and then gave them the cue during the dream
ticking
state.
clock thing?
It was like a ticking clock. It was a little different. It was a tone they used, and got people to dream about that thing that they were new thing they're trying to incorporate into their old schema. And if they dreamed about it, especially, but actually everybody, were better able to incorporate that into the scheme of who they are. Again, I wouldn't overuse this, be careful, but so I think, yeah, I don't know enough about AI, but probably, there's a way, biofeedback at least, to let people know what the state they're in, because they're oftentimes pretty much too much in their head and don't really know what their body is doing and how it's reacting.
So I'm going to follow up on something you just said. So based on something I've heard you talk about before, which is that if you understand the neuronal firing of a rat compared to where it's at in the maze, you can actually effectively read its mind. And so knowing look, I'm not an expert on AI, but I'm deep enough in it that I understand where this is headed. That AI really will be able to take inputs. If you put a device of sufficient fidelity on the brain and let me read the brain patterns, the waves, the neurons that are firing, that we'll be able to start to reconstruct what you're thinking about. They've been able to get very rooted, like if they tell you to think about a person's face, it's pretty startling, like how, I mean, it's not like a portrait, but like you start to get a sense of what they're thinking about. I have a feeling that we're going to get pretty good at interpreting brain signals. You'll need better sensors, but when you have a company like Neuralink, where it's actually tapping into the brain, combined with AI just recognizing pattern after pattern, because what you'll do is you'll read people, let's say 1 million people as wearables begin to be a thing, and you'll say, okay, this person is doing this thing and we get this readout. Therefore, when I see this readout, you're doing this thing. And they'll be able to basically just reverse the direction that they're thinking about it. And so that as I think about biofeedback and I think about AI and I think about just the ability to collect all of this data, that you'll be able to get somebody with a PTSD or whatever and say, okay, you're about to go to sleep. I'm going to visualize where your brain is right now, how you're feeling. And there's a target. And so you're going to start moving okay, this is a stressed brain. This is a calm brain. And as you move it there, the screen lights up or it does something to reinforce.
That's right.
And people will be able to use that visualized biofeedback as a way to control their emotional state, which is my fantasy. As somebody that struggled with anxiety, I was like, I really want a way to practice calming myself down, which is how I found meditation, which ended up being utterly transformational.
No, I think exactly that is the goal. I think the promise of these wearables is that they are measuring peripheral measures of heart rate variability, for example, temperature, skin conductance, a lot of these things that are peripheral measures of what's going on with our autonomic nervous system. That the thing that meditation is probably best at calming down. So I think there is real promise, because people, again, are kind of famously bad at reading their own bodies. And so if you can give them a device that tells them, there's a green window now, you're good, go to sleep, that would be amazing.
Be very amazing. So I am either just really dumb, and when I work out, I'm just terrible, or I have a natural tendency towards muscular imbalances. I fear it's column A. And so I have many times ended up having like really chronic pain from, it's often been in my traps or my scalenes, where I thought that I had a weakness in my traps and, I need to get my neck stronger or my trap stronger. But in reality, it was my middle back was weak. And I went to see a physical therapist and he pointed it out and he's like, nope, the problem's actually in your middle back and you're not stabilizing yourself. And he was like, fire your middle back muscle. And I'm like, I'm firing it. He's like, no, you're not. And I'm like, I promise you I am. And so he's like, okay, let me put biofeedback on you. And he's like, make it beep. And I'm like, okay, I'm firing it. And he's like, if it's not beeping, you're not firing the muscle. And so learning to fire it was eye-opening at how different my body map of where that muscle was and where the muscle actually was. I used to joke with him, I feel like I'm firing my heels to like get it that low in my back to just reach my mid-back.
Right.
But once I learned how to do it, my ability to, because it when I first started, it would beep at you. So when you fired it, beep, beep. And then by the time I was done, I could get it to go. And so I was like, wow. And so realizing that once you hear or don't hear, or in this case, see or don't see, you can make profound changes and you can fire things, in this case, a muscle that truly felt out of my conscious control, but slowly you're able to do it.
Yeah.
If people could get a hold of their autonomic nervous system, and I don't know how much they'll ultimately be able to get a hold of, but if you can get a hold of it, it's pretty profound. Are you familiar with tumult meditation? Do you know Wim Hof?
Nope.
Oh my gosh, you're going to love this. So I can't believe he's real. I've met him. As far as I can tell, he's been studied by science. He can maintain a core body temperature even in ice. And so he set all kinds of world records for swimming under ice. And his corneas froze and he went blind swimming under the ice. Thankfully, he was with a diver who was able to pull him back up. But like water that cold. And so he went into a laboratory setting and they measured his internal core temperature. He can do that. He can also take like a dime-sized spot in his palm and warm that up when people ask him to. They injected him with an endotoxin and he was able to muster an immune response. So everybody was like, okay, it's just you're a freak of nature. It's like, no, I can teach anybody to do this. So he teaches people. So anyway, this concept of tumult meditation is that basically they can control their heart rate, body temperature, so things that we would say are normally outside of the reach.
Like Houdini did, right?
It's interesting. I didn't know Houdini did that. But
supposedly.
yes, things like that, that there have been sort of the rare people throughout history that have been able to do. But if through wearables, AI, we can give people a better way of doing that, that's about as close to being a superhero as I can imagine getting.
I agree.
Yeah, that kind of stuff is, I really hope that ends up being a thing. Another thing that's very similar to that I've heard you talk about, I've always wanted to be able to do and I can't, is lucid dream. Is lucid dreaming real?
Oh yeah, it's real. I don't know if it's real good.
So for people that don't know what it is, what is it?
So it's a way to realize that you're dreaming and control your dreams or introduce a new element to it, or through some studies it says, okay, when you're in REM sleep, we're going to know, and we want you, when you hear this sound, to incorporate this thing into your dream, and when you've done it, tell us by moving your eyes in a particular pattern. So some people can do that, and they can do it about a third of the time of when they go into REM sleep. Not all the time, but a third of the time.
How does it not wake them up? The second I tell myself I'm dreaming, I wake up.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Do they train themselves?
So there is some controversy. Are they awake? Is there a good portion of their brain that is actually awake and able to respond? If you're able to respond to the outside world, hear a tone or whatever, and control your paradoxical in a way, I mean, how does that differentiate from wakefulness? It might actually be wakefulness. I said paradoxical sleep, REM sleep is paradoxical because your brain looks like it's awake. Well, it looks like it's awake during lucid dreaming too. So how do you know someone's still asleep? You don't. Atonia is really the only way, which is when our muscles are actively inhibited so that we don't act out our dreams. There's some indication that people who are lucid dreaming maintain that atonia, but atonia is something that could also be dissociated from sleep. People with cataplexy, narcolepsy with cataplexy, they will fall down with atonia while being perfectly awake. So it's controversial. Now, having said that, those dreams, people who do lucid dreaming, are very vivid, and they're different from daydreams. They're more active. They're more vivid, I guess is the way to say it. So it might be this in-between different brain state that's not just regular REM sleep. And the reason why I don't know if it's real good is because nobody has been able to record from the locus coeruleus, for example, or the dorsal raphe nucleus, which we know shut off during REM sleep. Do they shut off when someone's in lucid dreaming? They're awake. They're on whenever we're awake. So do they go on? Are we really? Is this state kind of a hallucinogenic kind of state that's more like wakefulness than sleep? We don't know. I would caution people to be cautious with it. Don't try and do it all the time, because in fact, if it's really more waking than sleep and it's serving sort of a waking function and not the sleep function, then you're depriving yourself of real REM sleep when you're doing it. So, and all the good things that come from real REM sleep. So I've lucid dreams. I've been able to tell I'm in a dream and change it in some way. It's a great way to get rid of nightmares. But I also just let myself have a real dream and wake up and remember just part of it instead of the whole thing. And so one of the new bits of research that we're doing in the laboratory is being done by a graduate student named Raquel Guthrie and another graduate student named Ward Pettibone. And what they're doing is they are seeing in animals and in humans whether or not the whole brain sleeps at the same time and is in the same sleep state at the same time. There's lots of evidence that animals that sleep unihemispherically, one hemisphere is awake while the other is asleep. People don't do that, but we might be able to sleep, one chunk of brain at a time. For example, our hippocampus, Raquel showed in humans, can be in asleep very long minutes before our cortex goes to sleep.
Interesting.
And so what is it doing? It's doing this other brainwave pattern, and it's not remembering. And this is probably, although we haven't done the study yet in people, probably the reason why we don't remember what happened in the 2 minutes before we go to sleep. So, if you're reading a book and you're falling asleep over the book, you can read the same page 4 times.
Over and over.
Yeah, over and over again.
I've done that many,
right.
many
That's
times.
because your hippocampus, your memory, immediate associative memory system is asleep. And so your cortex you're moving your eyes. The working memory is in your cortex, but it's not going into your long-term memory. So does that same thing happen during REM sleep? Can your hippocampus be in REM sleep while your cortex is in slow wave sleep, or the opposite? And maybe lucid dreaming is this thing where you can somewhat respond to the world around you because there are parts of your thalamus that's not closed. Can you remember dreams? People can remember their dreams and tell it to you vividly. Is it because their hippocampus is not asleep, actually? It's awake and writing those new memories in, even though, and those who can never remember their dreams, their hippocampus is in REM sleep proper. So we don't know the answers to these yet. There aren't enough people with electrodes planted in their brain that we can ask, what did you dream and how did you change your memories? We can't ask these things of animals. So we can't say, hey, what did you dream about? We can see what their activity of their brain is. And if it's not consistent with the world immediately around them, but consistent with the world that they experienced the day before, we can say, hey, it looks like that rat is running that maze. We can't ask it, were you dreaming about running the maze?
So it will actually replay the maze in its head?
Yeah.
That's so interesting, because dreams, the ones that you remember, I can't tell you a time where I have ever had a dream that was like the thing I learned I am dreaming about.
Right.
It might be something I'm stressed about, but the dream is so surreal that it's like, is this about that?
It's good. It's good that it's different. I think that's, again, that backing out from the literal thing to the dots again. So
it gives you a new way to interpret
interpret
But the rats are doing it literally?
Well, they do some of it literally, and sometimes they make moves that they can't make in real life. And so this is something that Ward is looking into. How do we gain insights from our dream state in rats? He's looking in rats. Do rats that have gained insight and shown you that they've gained insight by their performance, did their dream sleep and non-REM sleep state look differently than rats that didn't learn anything? Are the rats with PTSD? Do they just replay the literal thing that happened to them? And if they didn't get PTSD, are they replaying portions of that, but also, incorporating
in
new
an
bits
abstracted way?
Yeah, new insights.
That's really interesting. Do you put much stock in dream interpretation?
I love dream interpretation just because I think that it tells us how it's kind of like interpreting a movie, right? It tells us how we're thinking about things. I don't think it's necessary. I think most people don't remember their dreams well enough to, but the stories that we make up about our dreams reflect, who we are and where we are and what we're thinking.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Have you ever had recurring dreams?
Yeah.
One, I'd love to hear what they actually were. And I'd love to hear your breakdown of why recurring dreams. Is it something that we're struggling with?
Yeah, I think it is. I think, my recurring dream when I was a child was a big monster was chasing me, and my feet were like in mud. I couldn't run away from it. It was so stressful and so fear
Sounds
generating.
horrible.
Yeah, it was awful. And I told my mother about it, and probably because she was listening to The Mind Can Keep You Well, she said, okay, next time you have that dream, do something different than you've been doing every time these past times. And I said, okay, what should I do? She said, oh, let's see, what can you do? Think about it. And I was like, oh, I could stab the monster. I could hit it. And she's like, okay, let's rehearse that. So imagine yourself turning around and stabbing or hitting it. And so I did that. And then the next time I had that nightmare, I was too afraid to actually turn around and stab it or hit it or touch it in any way. But I was able to at least say, no, stop. And I was able to do something different. It was just something different, and it knocked me. I never had that recurring nightmare again. I've had other recurring dreams, flying, for example. It's a great recurring dream. It's a lot of fun. Or
That's
being
cool.
able to swim underwater. What's the use of that? I'm never going to be able to fly.
That's cool, though. Oh,
but,
man.
But maybe it has something else to do. Maybe that nightmare of the monster was about an uncontrollable force in my life that I couldn't get away from. And so in my dream, the fact that I was able to do something against that force may have allowed me to make a difference in my waking life too, against that thing that I didn't even know was the thing that I was embodying in my dream. But I could take some control over it, even if it was just saying no. So that maybe during my waking life, I was able to say no to this adult that was doing something to me. I don't know. I don't remember it back then, but it can be powerful. Our minds are extremely plastic when we're in the dream state of sleep. And so even though I think the interpretation of our dreams may say more about our waking selves, I think what happens during our dreams actually can change our minds and can change the way we think about the world. So again, flying dreams, I don't know, maybe that's about power and about, feeling in control and able to do things that you couldn't otherwise do. And so maybe it's a reflection of a sense of elation that I had about learning new things, like about the brain. Yeah.
It's really, really intriguing. Dreams are fascinating. I don't remember nearly enough of mine.
You probably remember just as much as you need to.
It's interesting. Maybe I used to remember more. And because I find dreams so interesting and because I'm such a student and fan of narrative, I always loved, they would just be so impossibly weird that, I don't know, there was something fun in the way that time can change or the way that things melt into something else or the way that it's like, oh, I'm talking to this Cocker Spaniel, but I know it's actually my mom.
Yeah.
And you're like, what?
And it changes into your mom and then changes into your girlfriend and then it changes back to the Cocker Spaniel.
It's like so weird.
It is wonderful. It's weird and wonderful. And I understand why you want to, remember more of your dreams because it's like a free movie that is just fun.
Yeah.
Right?
And that you are so wired into emotionally that it's literally plugged into your central nervous system, which is anybody that's into like the metaverse and stuff, like that's the fantasy, right? That one day, like you'll be able to actually experience these just impossible scenarios, but actually experience them. And you do when you dream, but I so rarely remember mine now. And I've never known is it because I have a high stress life and that's why I don't remember them? Because I used to have them a lot and do we dream every night?
Yeah.
No matter what?
No matter what.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm still dreaming clearly.
Yeah.
But I almost never remember them.
It might be a really good sign that your sleep is super efficient, and because again, we don't know, but it's quite possible that the dreams that you remember is because your hippocampus was actually awake maybe for the last half of the dream and able to sew that working memory, all that stuff into a long-term memory. And so that could be fine occasionally, but if you're doing it all the time, your hippocampus is missing out on all the brain clearing things that you need to do. So it could be a very good sign.
That makes sense. You've talked about the thalamus a couple times. I've heard you say in previous interviews that every time you do new research, your sense of where the consciousness is seated changes.
Yeah.
Are we currently settled on the thalamus? Do we not know? What's the...
No. I think consciousness is an emergent process. And so there's no one area that controls it.
Is it a complexity thing? You stack enough neurons and you're eventually going to get to consciousness?
Yeah, I think so. And so I think an outstanding question still is, can an ant be conscious? Or is it an ant colony that's conscious? Is it all of these individual players working together? Is a beehive conscious? How does, we transfer information one bee to the next, and
you
then
see them pulse?
Yeah. Oh,
be
yeah.
hard to say that they're not connected pretty rapidly.
Right. Yeah. And if you look at an individual neuron migrating to the spot it's going to go, you can say, well, that looks like a conscious being. It's making decisions. It's putting out its filopodia here or there. And then it's saying, nah, not that one. I'm going to go up here. And then I'm going to go over there. And it looks like you're watching a snail, go to the food or something like that, or a place of safety. And then if you think of, the billions of neurons you have in your brain as each independent, entities, then you think of it a city, as your brain as a city or a universe rather than an individual.
I actually have a quote that I wrote down of you saying that. Yeah. I find this really interesting. You said, and I quote, "It's almost like your brain is filled with billions of individuals making decisions and talking to one another. It's almost as if our brain is a city or even a universe full of communicating entities that do different tasks."
Yeah.
That's heavy.
And so how does that brain filled with independent entities direct our body to do anything? To be sitting here talking to you today, it takes, I don't know if it's just majority rules or what it is. Where's the will? We have no idea, but we do know will has a lot to do with things. For example, the belief that you can change can make all the difference in the world between whether you do change. Where does that belief come from? What is it that believes? Is it the consciousness of all of these entities saying, you know what, we're just going to do it, and there's no little man in our head saying, this is what we're going to do now. This is what we are. We're made of all these billions of neurons. Yeah,
that's a trip to me. It's interesting. I did not expect this theme to emerge in this conversation, but the idea of the metronome of something that is conducting all of these incredibly complex things. But when you think about each neuron really fighting for its own survival, looking for a connection, being self-directed in some way that I imagine we don't fully understand at this point.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that a self-emergence. Now, one of the things that I find utterly fascinating about the brain is that if you cut the corpus callosum, the thing that connects the two hemispheres, for those that don't know, you'll get two personalities.
Yeah.
That's weird.
It is crazy, isn't it? I mean, it's amazing. And yeah, those studies are so revealing about what consciousness is.
What do you take away from it? How do you interpret that data?
Well, we do know there is lateralization to function, like our language for the most of us is in the left hemisphere, and our spatial relations is in the right hemisphere. And the idea that these two areas, one can dominate the other and make it do what it wants, is really interesting. So one of those unihemispheric or those corpus callosum studies, the man was describing trying to dress himself in the morning and button up his shirt. And while his, right hand was buttoning, his left hand was unbuttoning. So it was like these two consciousnesses.
so
And does that mean that the left hemisphere just didn't know what the right hemisphere is doing? Just said, hey, why is my shirt, why is it coming together? I want to go to bed. Is the right hemisphere want to go to bed and the left hemisphere wants to go out into the world? I don't know. Because the right hemisphere doesn't have the language. When he talks about it, he talks about what he was trying to button up his shirt. He says, I was trying to button my shirt. If you were able to speak to his right hemisphere, would it say, oh yeah, that was silly, I was trying to go to bed, right?
It was interesting. One of the studies that I heard about, one of the hemispheres was deeply religious and the other was a pure atheist. I was like, wow, man, in the same brain.
Yeah.
And so you begin to realize that this is a competition of perhaps rivals going on in the brain, that there is some mechanism, whether it's majority rule or what, but something is happening and it happens so fast that you're unaware of it.
Yeah.
And I feel like a stable me. I feel a sense of I have a self. And like, this is one thing I've often thought about with alcohol is, and look, I've never been blind drunk the way a lot of people have, but I've never not felt like me.
Yeah.
I've always felt, I call this my Overwatch mechanism. I've always felt like there's a me version above, like I feel the silly impulses the way that everybody else does, but I feel like I've got a guy sort of riding above it all.
Yeah.
That's me.
Yeah.
And so that idea, knowing that it's actually super false, and my brain is billions of these somehow cooperating things that come to some kind of consensus, and can move me forward and cause me to react to, so like if I see a hose out of the corner of my eye and I think it's a snake, I'll jump back like so fast, or pulling your hand back from something that's hot before you have any sort of conscious awareness. So weird.
It is.
Humans are a trip.
I think it's incredible, everything that you said. Also, it's incredible that we wake up still me in the morning, considering how much is going on in our brains, how different our brains are when we fall asleep, how much plasticity happens with REM sleep. How do we wake up still knowing who we are and feeling like we're the same person? Especially when I think about... how do we recognize a childhood friend? It's like, oh yeah, you're the same. How do we say you're the same? It's been 30 years since we saw them, 40 years. And how do we know that? Maybe they aren't. Maybe you both have changed together and that's why you recognize them. I don't know. Anyway, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, it's just that you have a sense, every cell in your body is turning over, but there's a sense of you that does stay the same.
Yeah.
I've thought about this with skin. Like if you get a sunspot or a liver spot or whatever they're called, every cell in your body's turning over, but somehow that stays.
Yeah.
So like
scars stay. Yeah.
Scars I sort of get. Do the cells turn over in a scar? I guess they must, right? Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I just recently learned from Aaron Schumann, who's in Germany, that the rate at which proteins turn over in our brains. So, every 7 days.
Whoa.
Our neurons are different because every protein is turned over. So
that's startling.
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
And I'd heard it was every 7 years, which is still incredible, right? And so there must be something that's slower than protein turnover that takes longer, but it's
that's
amazing.
Really interesting. That must have implications in terms of neurodegenerative disease. Like if you could halt whatever is breaking down and make sure that the next round is healthy, that's actually really encouraging from like a stem cell standpoint. If things are turning over that fast, obviously I have no idea if that's going to end up being productive or not, but
very well could be.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Gina, this is utterly fascinating. Where can people follow you?
I have my own lab website. I don't update it as often as I should. So instead, if you want to go to the department at UCLA, it's the Integrative Biology and Physiology, or just ibp.ucla.edu. I will make sure that my lab website is tied to that and is linked. But my department's full of really great people doing super fascinating research, and so all UCLA is. I'm also part of the Brain Research Institute, bri.ucla.edu. But either way, IBP is fine. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Guys, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace.
Click here now to learn the most common sleep mistakes that are destroying your health.
From an evolutionary perspective, sleep is the most idiotic of all behaviors. When you think about it, because firstly, when you're asleep, you're not finding a mate, you're not reproducing,